Wonderstruck Books presents Confessions to the Girl Next Door, a Crystal Creek novel. Written by Danyelle Ferguson and read for you by Cindy Gunderson. Copyright 2023, Danyelle Ferguson. Chapter 1. Sweat trickled down Laura's back. From inside the moving truck, she and her best friend Bree pushed a pile of boxes toward her brother and their friends. Sporadic wind bursts rocked the truck from side to side. Thankfully, February's freezing rain had already faded into March's more temperate season. They had already moved the bigger furniture inside, and only the boxes remained. So many boxes. Laura let out a weary sigh. "Be careful. I think a few of those are filled with books." "Peter can handle those," her brother BJ said, handing off the heaviest box to his crew boss at Elliott Construction. Peter grunted as he shifted the box in his arms. "It's about time you acknowledged my superior strength." "As if," BJ replied, rolling his eyes. Peter moved towards the house. "At least your sister will know who to call the next time she has a project that requires heavy lifting." "Just wait until Monday. He's going to save the yuckiest site work for you," Charlie teased, bumping her shoulder to Peter's as he passed by. The trio continued to razz each other as they made yet another trip across the driveway and into Laura's new home, while she paused to once more admire the soft yellow craftsman bungalow. It was on the small side, but the large backyard made up for it in spades. She had plans for that backyard. Her fingers itched for spring to arrive, to till the earth and plant 100 fabulous things. In fact, the whole neighborhood made her excited for the coming seasons. Paisley Street was lined with tall trees just waiting to turn brilliant shades of red, yellow, and orange come October. Growing up, this street had been her favorite to bike down on her way to Crystal Creek Park, and now it was all hers. Or at least this little corner was. And it was just the beginning of her new adventure. "It's about time you finally moved back," Bree said, jumping down from the truck bed, then grabbing a box. "When do you take over the flower shop?" Laura hefted her own box while she replied, "Monday morning. Gladys is sticking around for the week in case I have questions, but once the clock strikes 5 on Friday, she and her hubby are firing up the RV and hitting the road." "Are you ready for this?" "I don't think I'll have any problems since I've been coming up on the weekends for the past month. I've got the ordering and payroll systems down." Laura set her box down beside the growing pile in the living room. "To be honest," she said, turning to her best friend, "all I want to do is sign the papers and start making it mine. Everything from the actual store to the software needs to be updated. Charlie is meeting me Monday afternoon to talk about renovations. Then I'm meeting with the PR company I hired to discuss new logos, website, the whole shebang. I'm planning a grand reopening under the new name." Laura bounced up and down, clapping her hands together. "I can't believe this is my life." Bree pulled her in for a tight hug. "I'm so excited for you. And selfishly happy to have you back." After another squeeze, they headed back out for the next round of boxes. Thankfully, Laura only had an apartment load of stuff. The house would feel a bit empty for a while, but she was confident it would be fun to make the space her own. Laura climbed back into the truck's pit of boxes. She briefly saw a pickup truck drive by and pull into the next driveway. After she got everything unloaded, she'd have to introduce herself to her new neighbors. Squatting, she pushed at the base of a tower of boxes, trying to shift them into a better position. A pungent stench drifted up from inside her shirt, making her nose wrinkle. Ugh. On second thought, maybe she should shower before meeting anyone. "Hey, new neighbor," a deep voice called, echoing into the truck. "Can I help?" Laura froze. She knew that voice. No. No. It couldn't possibly be. "Zack? I haven't seen you since high school." Bree stepped around another pile of boxes. She shot a wide-eyed glance toward Laura, who shook her head frantically, staying hidden behind her tower. "Holy cow. Bree Bell. Good to see you. Are you moving in?" His voice had changed, deepened, and yet it was the same. Memories of playing clarinet in the band bleachers, swapping folded-up notes between their friends, razzing the opposing team on the field. It all crashed into her like she was still walking the halls of Crystal Creek High. Her stupid heart went into butterfly mode, fluttering just like it had way back then. How could she have chosen the one house in all of Crystal Creek that was next door to her high school crush? No, not exactly. I mean, I'm helping a friend move in. BJ's voice joined the conversation. Hey, it's Zack Partridge. How you doing, buddy? Laura squeezed her eyes shut as she heard the rumble of greetings, knowing Peter and Charlie were with them too. The longer she hid behind the boxes, the more awkward it would be when she eventually had to reveal herself. Not wanting to overthink the situation, she steeled her nerves and popped up. In her rush, her hip slammed against the tower, making it sway. She grabbed at the boxes to stabilize them, but stepped on her own foot, tangling her legs together and stumbling. The resulting crash was like the percussion section's cymbals announcing her arrival. Utter disaster. Zack was looking right at her. Heat flooded her face as she locked eyes with the man she tried so hard to forget 8 years ago. I'm the new neighbor. She gave the most pathetic, girly wave ever. It was high school all over again. But Zack? He wasn't the same band geek she'd hung out with. How was it possible for him to look even more amazing? From his sexy bedhead hairstyle to his bright hazel green eyes, her gaze continued to travel down over a red plaid dress shirt and preppy jeans. His sleeves were rolled up to expose well-defined forearms. The new and improved Zack made her not-so-teenage heart thump, thump, thump. Or maybe that was her brother whacking the side of the truck to get her attention. Grateful for an opportunity to clear her head from the man just as openly appraising her as she had him, she turned to her brother. I ordered pizzas, BJ said. They should be here in about 45 minutes. So, let's get this wrapped up. Laura clambered out of the truck while her brother and friends grabbed their next load, the promise of a food delivery providing renewed energy. Zack cleared his throat. Hey, Laura, how've you been? Fine, just fine, she mumbled, pushing back the loose hair falling out of her braided pigtails. A little eau de Laura wafted, and she quickly clamped her arms to her side, picking at the edge of her... Oh, heavens. A giant chicken covered the front of her hoodie sweatshirt. Below it came the words, Chickens, the pet that poops breakfast. Ironically, her t-shirt style was Zack's fault. Laura had worn jeans or leggings topped with funny shirts ever since freshman year of high school, when they had spent an entire summer of clarinet sectionals talking about her variety of goofy shirts. Hunting down new tops for her collection had become almost an obsession, just because seeing him smirk while trying to hold in a laugh was, oh, so worth it. The obvious differences in their fashion growth were glaring. Had she not evolved since high school? BJ butted in once more. Hey, Partridge, you gonna stand there or grab a box? Zack jumped into motion, probably relieved to get out of such an awkward situation. Still, Laura couldn't help but check him out from behind. He'd changed so much physically. What else had changed in his life? Was he dating someone? Married? Her gut clenched. The thought of living next door to him and his happy wife made her feel like puking. Why hadn't she thought to meet the neighbors before snatching up the house? Maybe she could talk to Victoria and ask what she could do to relist it. Yeah, she could fix it up, flip it in 6 months, and move far, far away. But she loved her cute little sunshiny house. It made her happy. And seriously, why should Zack Partridge have that type of power over her life? He wasn't interested in her as anything other than a friend. Senior prom had tattooed that hurtful truth on her heart, and nothing in the past 8 years had changed it. Chapter 2. Zack couldn't believe it. Laura Anderson was back. The girl who'd stolen his heart without him even realizing it. He snuck another peek as she passed him, chatting with Charlie as they exited the house. Not paying attention to where he was going, he walked right into a wall, smushing the box in his arms. The folded flaps popped open, releasing an explosion of girly clothes. He tried not to look as he grabbed socks and all manner of lacy things and shoved them back inside as quickly as possible. The whole thing was just as disastrous as his promposal. He'd been stupidly obsessed with Laura Abramson, the hot cheerleader who flirted with him all through senior year. In an attempt to impress her, he arranged for the barbershop choir to deliver an epic promposal. He was sure such a thing would make her see him as more than just the geeky boy who helped her study for AP statistics. The choir came through. He remembered how his palms itched with sweat when they began to sing in front of the whole AP stats class. His eyes were glued to Laura, anxious to see her reaction for the grand finale. Except when the lead singer brought out the red rose, he knelt and presented it to Laura Anderson, band buddy, not hot cheerleader. He was mortified. But then, the way her cheeks flushed pink with delight and how she pressed her nose into the rose when she said yes? Dang. He just couldn't bring himself to tell her it was all a mistake. So he secretly moped about his bad luck, even whined to a few close friends. That is, until a week before prom, when he discovered that not only was cheerleader Laura only interested in how his brain could help her pass math, but she was also taking her college boyfriend to prom. Oddly enough, it didn't shatter his world. He just felt disappointed. Wasn't teen love supposed to be angsty and heartbreaking? It was a revelation to him that he hadn't been crushing on her nearly as much as he thought. And hey, at least he was going to prom with a friend. They'd have fun. Zack closed his eyes, the memories of that night permanently stored in the file cabinet that was his brain. The shimmer of her navy blue gown, the way her caramel hair cascaded down her back in waves, the sparkle in her pale blue eyes. It was like the earth shifted on its axis. How had he missed how absolutely stunning Laura was? Everything about their date was easy. Dinner first, chatting about all their friends, band years, and shared classes. Then his heart leapt when she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, and he proudly escorted her into the dance. Suddenly, he wished he had spent the entire senior year with her by his side. He could have recovered from the promposal. They could have talked about it afterward, laughed, and started dating. But nothing ever works out like that. Instead, one of his idiot friends made a joke about the mixed-up promposal and ruined it all. Hurt radiated from Laura's eyes as she folded her arms protectively across her chest, crushing the corsage's flowers. Zack tried to explain, but his stupid teenage brain couldn't figure out the right words to say, rambling something about it didn't matter and making Laura think he didn't care about their date. Tears had filled her eyes before she darted across the room, pulling her corsage off and dropping it in a trash can before she escaped the dance. His heart felt like someone had laid it on the 50-yard line, then lined up the marching band to trample it to bits. That was when he realized the most important truth. Laura Anderson wasn't just his band buddy. He quite possibly loved her. Over the last 2 weeks of the school year, he tried again and again to apologize, to explain, but every attempt was blocked. It destroyed him to have hurt her so deeply. And then the worst pain. She walked across their graduation stage and out of his life. Zack had spent the last 8 years trying to convince himself it had only been teenage puppy love and that true, lasting friendship, the kind that blossomed into real love, was waiting just around the corner. He crammed 4 years of college into 3, added another year for a master's program, and then 4 years of living full-fledged adult life. Still, nothing ever came close to how he'd felt on prom night. But now, she was back. Maybe, just maybe, fate was giving him a second chance. "Everything okay?" Laura asked, breaking his reverie. She stacked another box on a pile and walked over. "Yes," he said, making sure the lacy things were in the box, then shoving the flaps down, interweaving them so everything stayed securely in place. "I wasn't watching where I was going and had a little accident. Just cleaning it up real quick." "Well, at least it was just clothes. Nothing breakable." She glanced down at a pair of socks he'd missed and set it on top of the box. Her pale blue eyes met his before flitting away. "Thanks for helping. You didn't need to interrupt your day to move my stuff." "It's no problem." He set the offending box to the side. She looked so cute with her wrinkled nose and pigtails. He was tempted to reach out and give one of the braids a gentle tug. Instead, he shoved his hands into his pockets. "Would you like to come over for dinner tonight? I could grill out." "Why?" He blinked, her question so unexpected that he stammered. "Well, it would be nice to hear what you've been up to, and what brought you back to Crystal Creek. You know, welcome you to the neighborhood." She twisted the edge of her shirt around her finger. "Thanks, but I'm going to pass. I have a lot of things to take care of, unpacking and stuff." That was logical. "Maybe Sunday or Monday? I'm pretty flexible." Her sigh was heavy, which made his fingers curl into a fist in his pockets. He just knew what was coming. At prom, he said, rushing to stop the inevitable, his heart sinking when she flinched. You never let me explain. Let's not talk about it, okay? I left it in the past. Obviously, that's not true, he countered. Zack, my life is great now, and I'd really like to keep living it. He swallowed past the despair clogging his throat. Just not with the neighbor next door. A pretty pink tinged her cheeks, making him wish he could reach out and smooth his thumb over them to reconnect with her. Thanks for coming to say hi and helping. I really do appreciate it, but I think we've got it from here. He drew in a deep breath. I truly am sorry. There's so much more about that night that I wish you'd let me explain. Laura looked away, her expression carefully blank. Okay. He took a step back, recognizing that he had lost the battle. At least for today. His eyes swept over her one last time, reminding himself that she wasn't going to disappear this time. Tomorrow, the next day, or the next week, there would be an opportunity for their friendship to be renewed. Chapter 3. Laura ran her hand over the scarred golden oak counter where the floral shop's register was located. How many hours had she spent in that exact spot, taking orders and ringing up customers? Turning a full circle, she noted how 1980s the shop looked, with its faded artwork on the walls and knickknacks crowding every available shelf space. While there were many things about that decade she appreciated, it was time to bring the shop into the present-day trends. What are you envisioning for this space? Charlie asked, her phone prepped for notes. They had already gone through the back end of the shop, which had been a frustrating experience. Laura wanted to make the workflow more efficient, but Mr. Weaver, the building's landlord, made it very clear the only thing she could change was the paint. She couldn't take out bulky shelving or cabinets to create a more appropriate storage space. For the time being, she was going to have to be content with updating what she could and establishing her brand. Something much less crowded and not hunter green, she began. I'm thinking creamy whites with touches of bright colors, mostly from flower arrangements and plants. I also don't want it to look too much of one particular style. It should be easy to update for seasons and however interior design trends change. Right now, modern farmhouse is popular, so I'd love to incorporate that into the shop, but I'm sure it will be something else in 5 years. I want to stay current, trendy, but not have to repeatedly pay the giant redecorating prices either. I totally get you there. Do you have a preference for dark or light woods? I don't like the orangey tone of the old oak trim, but we're also going to need to work with whatever is here. I'm not sure if Mr. Weaver will allow us to paint the trims, so I'm going to rely on your expertise. The door jingled. Laura didn't have any pickup scheduled, so she let the customer browse for a few moments while she finished up this meeting. Charlie nodded, her thumbs flying over the screen's keyboard. I can mock up a few options that would give you a neutral base. Then we can add in updated shelving and furniture elements to bring in the look and pops of color you want to go for. Before you go too far with renovations, you should figure out your branding. Her breath caught as she turned to find Zack in her shop. Her heart skipped a beat as the familiar feeling of déjà vu coursed through her. Zack, hi. For a moment, they just stood there, locked in an intense stare. His white dress shirt was tucked into a pair of very nice-fitting jeans that made her wish he'd turn around so she could see how well they looked from the backside. And his smile. It was oh so charming, but not in a cocky way, more in a he knows something I don't know way. Like maybe he knew what she was thinking? The thought made her heart kick into a fast-paced Cotton-Eye Joe line dance. Would she ever be able to control her reactions when he was nearby? Good morning, Laura. Charlie. He nodded, acknowledging the contractor's presence without moving his eyes from Laura. His hazel eyes reflected more green today. Maybe the current wall color wasn't so bad after all. I didn't realize you were the new owner, but I should have known. You loved working here in high school. Didn't you go to college for flower arrangement stuff? I can't remember what the major is called. Sorry. Horticulture and a minor in floral design. She tilted her head, wondering if he was there to pick up flowers for someone special. What kind of women did he date? More former cheerleader types or someone more down to earth? She shook her head, annoyed with her thoughts. Whatever he needed, she would have preferred he went to the floral shop on the other side of town. Is there something in particular you're looking for? You. His determined tone sent shivers all the way to the soles of her feet. Zack held out his hand. I'm the Crystal Creek rep for Premier PR. I'll be working with you on the shop's rebranding. You? She frantically thought back to her conversation with the Kansas City rep for her former employer. He said they had a guy over the Crystal Creek area, but because it was more country than suburb, there was just one. She hadn't worried about it because the Kansas City rep had lots of great things to say about the Crystal Creek guy. Now she wished he had mentioned Zack's name before she signed the contract to work with them. She eyed his waiting hand like it was a viper ready to sink its poisonous teeth into her. She pushed past the emotions swirling inside, determined to be professional, and clasped his hand. Big mistake. The shivers morphed into a roller coaster track of thrills, stuck on a never-ending loop until she pulled her hand away, breaking their contact. Charlie cleared her throat, tucking her phone into her back pocket. I think I have all the info I need for now. I'll email some mock-ups and quotes for the front end. We can get started as soon as a quote is approved and supplies arrive. I just wish I could help you out more with the workshop. Me too. I'm looking forward to working with you, Laura said, grateful to put space between her and Zack as she accompanied Charlie to the shop door. She took a deep breath, trying to soothe her frazzled nerves. When the door swung closed, Zack asked, Are you looking forward to working with me too? Apparently, her plan to avoid her new neighbor was impossible. She crossed her arms across her chest, meeting his hazel eyes straight on. Perhaps we should consider other options. Surely there's a Kansas City rep who'd like to take this account. Sorry, he said, looking anything but apologetic. Each rep has specific zones he works in. The agency is strict about enforcing it, so no one feels like their territory is being poached. That means you're stuck with me. Of course she was. She eyed him, trying to discern if he was telling the truth. Once upon a time, she would have never questioned his honesty. But then there was prom. Who knew what kind of man he was now? You can do this, Laura. It's just for a few months. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. He shifted away from her, turning to evaluate the shop. How does it feel to reclaim a piece of your past? Good, she said, tiptoeing her way through the conversation. It feels like home. He nodded. She wondered what he saw, what memories the shop evoked from his point of view. Then his eyes came back to hers. I hope you continue to rediscover the good. Perhaps we should talk about the shop, she said, directing their conversation onto a more professional track. Of course. She led him to the back and motioned to the work table. Pull up a seat. Thanks. She slid onto a stool, then clenched her hands together on her lap while she quietly studied him. Muscles rippled as he shrugged out of his navy jacket and draped it over the stool next to him. His body had changed from skinny band geek to sexy ripped geek. It made her wonder what else about him had changed over the past 8 years. Zack settled on a stool across from her and opened his laptop. We'll start with some basic new client questions. Then we'll get into more specifics about your shop. She nodded, answering each of his questions, providing contact information and other basic details. Then they got to the good stuff. Do you have a new name in mind for the shop? She smiled, relaxing for the first time since he arrived. Oopsie Daisy, with an exclamation mark at the end. She'd agonized so long over choosing a name, and she was proud of the result. So it was rewarding to hear his chuckle as he acknowledged. That's so you. Thank you, she said. I just kept coming back to wanting something fun and quirky. Like your shirts? Exactly. She glanced down at her shirt of the day, which proclaimed, Short girls! God only lets things grow until they're perfect. Some of us didn't take as long as others. They continued to discuss logo designs, colors, and styles to incorporate into a website, social media platforms, as well as new shop signage. She occasionally popped out of the workroom to help walk in customers. Despite the interruptions, talking with Zack was surprisingly easy, much like it had been in school. An unexpected pang of sadness swept through her, and she bit her lip to ward off the sting of tears. Sitting with him, talking through her dreams and goals, brought so many hurtful memories to the forefront of her mind, a reminder of everything she'd lost in one night. After ringing up a birthday balloon and flower arrangement, she returned to the back to find Zack all packed up. Are we done? For today, he replied, looping the briefcase strap over his shoulder. I'll have some logo designs in the next 24 hours. They'll be rough drafts, basically just starting points to see color palettes and layouts. From there, we'll get into the really good designs until we reach the final one you love. It usually takes 3 or 4 rounds. Then we'll plug it all into the website design, social media, etc. I'm excited to see it all come together. Laura led him around the front counter, past some floral basket displays, and to the front door. Here's my card. You might want to add my email address to your contacts. Their fingers brushed as she accepted the card, reigniting the roller coaster tingles. Warmth crept into her cheeks, so she deflected her eyes away from his by pretending to check out the card. Oh, look, there's your email address. Yep, I can get that added to my contacts. Oh, heavens. She clamped her mouth shut to prevent any more dorky sentences from escaping. She lifted her eyes and found him grinning back at her, like a Cheshire cat who had just discovered a large bowl of cream. Working together was going to be just as problematic as she'd feared. She steeled herself. She could do this. She could work with Zack and get her business off the ground without falling back into her high school crush. At least she hoped she could. Would you like to meet tomorrow to go over logo mock-ups? At the unexpected question, she shifted her weight from side to side. I have a banquet to prep for, so most of my day is booked. Let me see when I can schedule a break. She pulled out her phone and clicked on the calendar icon. How about in the evening? Maybe over dinner? She hesitated. The thought of being alone with Zack was both thrilling and terrifying. But really, it was just to discuss business. There was nothing awkward about that at all, right? The shop phone rang, startling her and forcing her to make a decision. I guess that would be okay. She hesitantly agreed, then gestured to the front counter. I have to get that. No problem. I'll message you with the details, but let's plan for tomorrow evening at 7. She nodded, watching him leave as she picked up the phone, giving the store greeting on autopilot. After the call ended, she leaned against the counter, looking out the window in the direction he had disappeared. Dinner wasn't that big of a deal. It would be a one-time thing. Professional. Or was she making excuses because, deep down, she wondered if they could be friends again? If she cracked open that particular door, how would she keep her heart safe? Chapter 4. Laura gave the green salad one last toss before searching the drawers for the plastic cling film. It had to be around here somewhere. Aha! Success! She pulled off enough to cover the salad bowl, only to have it bunch up. She attempted to unwad it, but ended up tearing a hole instead. So she tried a new stretch of film. But this time, it twisted up like a tornado mid-transfer. Why did anyone use this stuff? She grabbed the foil instead and covered the bowl. Okay, do I have everything? She quickly assessed what she had gathered for her dinner with Zack. Salad and serving spoon, notebook and pen for taking notes, phone in her back pocket. Yep, she had everything together. She glanced at the oven display only to see she had 15 minutes to spare. Was that too early? He was a guy, so he was probably scrambling to get things ready on his end. Or he was distracted by the gorgeous Hispanic woman leaving his house. She shouldn't be spying on him, but was it really spying if her kitchen window looked out toward his house? She had a perfect view of him chatting with the woman while he carried a box of something to her car, shifting it onto his hip to pull the backseat door open before depositing it inside. The woman bounced onto her tippy toes to give him a hug and a quick kiss on the cheek. Did he return the kiss? Laura couldn't quite tell from her vantage point. Not that she cared. Yet she continued craning her neck at a most uncomfortable angle to try to catch all of their interaction before the woman pulled away, leaving Zack to return to his home, presumably to make dinner for them. Maybe she should just cancel. There was no need to make the situation more awkward, or complicated, or whatever. She shook her head. Backing out was ridiculous. She was a grown woman, successful, smart, sassy, all the things she'd always wanted to be. There was no way she was letting this stupid teenage obsession get in the way of achieving her dreams. She snatched the salad off the counter, picked up her notebook and pens, then headed over to his house. She marched up the front porch steps and knocked firmly to announce her arrival. Zack opened the door, a wide smile ready to greet her. Hey, Laura. I'm so glad you're here. Warmth emanated from him, filling her up with what could only be described as a flock of Twitter-pated birds. The hurricane of wings beat hopelessly in her chest, forcing her to realize she had no chance of winning in this battle arena. Her stupid heart still utterly and completely belonged to Zack Partridge. Numbness coursed through her, and the bowl slipped through her fingers, luckily rescued by Zack's quick reflexes. "Saved," he exclaimed, grinning triumphantly. It was all a blur, though, because, dang it all, her emotions were doing the curly-cue roller coaster thing. She pressed a hand to her stomach and took a step back, her voice shaky as she floundered for a reason to escape. I have to go." When his face fell into a disappointed frown, the twitter-pated birds plunged low in her stomach. I'm sorry, I really have to go." "Laura, wait." But she didn't. She spun around and did the crazy lady fast walk toward the safety of her home. "Nope, nobody, nope," she mumbled to herself. She wouldn't allow herself to be tempted by him again. She had just made it onto her property when Zack took her arm and pulled her around to face him. Heat flushed through her body as she erected barriers to protect her heart. His hand slid from where he caught her by the elbow down to clasp her hand. "Don't go." His voice was whisper-soft. "I feel like there's something here. Something we should talk about." She yanked her hand free. "I can't." "Why?" he prodded. She shot him a cold glare. "I've grown up, Zack. I'm stronger, have more opinions. Heck, I can actually have intelligent conversation and voice my opinions around others." She took a step back, adding more space between them, and crossed her arms. "I won't be that silly teenager again." "Neither of us will. Instead, we'll be the wiser adults we are today." Their gazes held, making all the neighborhood background noise fade away. Could she trust him? The bigger question was, could she risk being hurt again? It was all too big, too scary, too unpredictable. "No, I'm not ready for any of this," she answered truthfully, motioning between the two of them. "I really need to go. Could you email the logos?" A look of disappointment passed over his features. "If that's what you really want." She gave a jerky nod, then turned to hurry away. Distance. She needed some space to breathe and think. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me. Good night, Laura." His words followed her as she entered her home and locked the front door. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, where she finally collapsed. She fisted the pillow in her hands, letting loose a scream as frustration and resentment bubbled over, sending off a hot stream of tears. Everything, her feelings, goals, memories, all of it was tied up into one giant tangled thorny mess. How could she possibly navigate it all without hacking her heart to pieces? When she woke, the bedroom was shrouded in darkness. She blinked several times, trying to alleviate the gritty sandpaper feel in her eyes. She glanced at the alarm clock. It was a little past 8. Thankfully, her nap had been a brief reprieve from the angsty turn her life had taken. Thunk, thunk, thunk. The sound of hammering reverberated through the house. Someone's outside project must have been what had woken her. The annoying sound didn't last long, thankfully, fading almost as soon as she identified it. She sighed and pulled herself out of bed. Though she didn't want to, she needed to eat. Preferably a mountain of chocolate. She searched the cupboards and refrigerator for something appealing, but nothing caught her eye. She settled for a bowl of healthy-ish cereal and a handful of peanut M&Ms. Peanuts counted as protein, right? She dropped her head into her hand as she chewed the bland, frosted, shredded wheat, trying to sort through all the yuck that had transpired that evening. Why couldn't her stupid heart heal and move on? Her phone dinged, signaling an incoming email. She swiped the app open, then bit her lip when she saw Zack's name in the sender field and logos as the subject. She debated whether to open it or not, but her curiosity about the logos won. Dear Laura, the link below will take you to a preview of the promised logos. Remember, they are just a starting point to creating your final brand. Please fill out the questionnaire on the logo page to send us feedback for the next round. Also, you've got mail. Check your fence. Sincerely, Zack Partridge. What the what? She peered out the sliding glass doors into her backyard. Perched on the 4-foot fence line was a rustic navy mailbox with the red flag sticking straight up, indicating a delivery. There certainly hadn't been a mailbox there that morning. Are you kidding me? What was he thinking? Mounting a mailbox on her fence? If he thought she was going to be charmed and play along, he certainly had another thing coming. She tugged the blackout curtains closed. Turning her back on the doors, she stomped over to the kitchen table. The soggy cereal was even more unappetizing, so she dumped it down the disposal. Then she grabbed the bag of peanut M&Ms and flopped onto the living room couch. She turned on her favorite home channel and wished she was part of the show's demolition crew ripping out the hideous bathroom they would eventually renovate. Instead, she chomped on chocolate candies while she rolled her shoulders, shifting her position on the couch again and again. The need to push everything about Zack aside warred with her desire to know what was up with the mailbox. Each time her eyes wandered to the back door, she forced them back to the TV until she finally gave in. She nudged the blackout curtains apart just enough to peek out. Yep, it was still there. She twisted her t-shirt around her finger, debating. Should she go or should she stay? She could just go to bed, but the stupid mailbox would be waiting for her in the morning. If she held off, she'd end up tossing and turning all night. She was determined to get it over with now. A gust of bitter cold hit her straight in the chest when she slid the door open. She wrapped her arms around herself and quickly crossed the yard to where the mailbox stood. "You've Got Mail" was etched into the lid, and a little gold latch kept it securely closed. She bent over the fence to see Zack's side of the mailbox had an identical door. Straightening up, she released the gold latch and pulled down the lid, revealing a white square of paper. She pinched her bottom lip between her teeth. He'd gone to all this effort to exchange letters? Should she encourage this craziness or shut it down? Another gust of wind rocked her to the side, and without overthinking the situation, she snatched the note from the box, closed the lid, and flicked the latch into place. As almost an afterthought, she lowered the red flag, then ran for the warmth of her home. Once inside, she sat down at the kitchen table, turning the note over in her hands. It was folded intricately, just like the notes in high school. A little half-fold had her name written on it. She tugged it loose, then followed the pattern to unwrap the note. To the girl next door. Remember how we exchanged notes among our clarinet group in high school? I think it's time to renew the tradition now that we're neighbors. Your challenge is to answer the question below and ask me a new one. Confession number 1. What's the weirdest food you ate in college? Me. Popcorn-flavored marshmallows. Who the heck eats popcorn-flavored marshmallows instead of good old popcorn? It's your turn. The guy next door. Her fingers ran over his familiar script. Memories of passing notes flitted through her mind like a picture show. Once a note was started, it wasn't complete until each person in the clarinet section had a chance to respond. Around and around, the notes would be passed on the sly in classes, during passing periods, or stuffed between the slots of someone's locker. Most of the topics were favorite TV shows or random trivia questions. Occasionally, they turned to serious topics. When their friend Ashton died in a car accident, there was a series of notes about the meaning of life, and if there really was a God. Their words were an anchor for everyone involved, cementing their friendships over the course of high school. Did she want to open herself up to Zack in that way again? To let him peek inside the past 8 years? She twisted a section of hair around her finger, contemplating the pros and cons. She could respond, or she could rip the mailbox off the fence and bury it in the yard so Zack couldn't find it. She twisted and twisted the hair until it couldn't twist any further, then gave a tug against her scalp. Ugh, it shouldn't be this difficult. She released the hair, grabbed the note, and used a magnet to slap it onto the refrigerator. No way was she going back out into the cold tonight, so she'd just sleep on it. Besides, if she decided to kidnap the mailbox, she'd have to do it on the sly. So, instead of obsessing about responding to the note, she began brainstorming ways to dispose of a dead mailbox body. Chapter 5. Over the next few days, Zack caught glimpses of Laura standing at her sliding glass door, staring out at the mailbox. Sometimes it was early in the morning while she held a steaming mug. Other times it was sunset while she balanced a dinner plate. Back in high school, whenever she was faced with a tough decision, she spent days making lists. Not just pros and cons, but running through all sorts of scenarios and possible outcomes. It almost made him smile to think she was doing that now. Their email exchanges had been professional. Other than the first one with the mailbox clue, neither of them had mentioned it again. He dropped into the flower shop briefly with some printouts of her top 2 logos so she could visualize the color schemes in the store. All professional and friendly. He was dying to ask her about the note, about her thoughts, but he didn't give in to temptation. Instead, he waited and waited for the red flag to signal her response. He even wondered if he should send another note, letting her know the previous one was set to self-destruct in 24 hours, just to nudge her along. But he resisted. The next step needed to be hers, even though the wait was slowly killing him. What if she didn't respond? What if she really wanted nothing to do with him? Nada. Rien. Fini. On day 5, he peeked out his bedroom window at dark 30 in the morning, saw the red flag lifted, and sprinted through the house. He didn't even bother with shoes, instead braving the shards of crunchy frozen dew barefoot. When he made it back inside, he hopped from side to side, thawing out his feet on the entryway rug as he quickly unfolded the note. To the guy next door. Confession number 1. A hamburger topped with PB&J and bananas. It was weird, yet oddly tasty. My question for you. Confession number 2. What's the most cringeworthy outfit you've ever worn? 3 years ago for Halloween, everyone at the Casey Floral Shop wore adult Care Bear pajamas, complete with hoodies, paws, and all. I was Cheer Bear. Although by the end of the day, I was definitely Grumpy Bear on the inside. Sincerely, the girl next door. Zack grinned. The game was on. He quickly ripped a new page out of the notebook he had stashed in a kitchen drawer. Dear girl next door. Care Bear costume at work? Ha! I can totally picture it. Did you Care Bear stare anyone? But I've got you beat on that one. Quick background. You remember my cousin Graydon, right? He was 4 years ahead of us in school. Went pro hockey. Got seriously injured a few years ago and retired. Now he runs a nonprofit kids hockey camp that travels around the country. I run their PR and help with event stuff. Confession number 2. Picture hockey camp in Denver. The local pro team comes to instruct and brings their mascot, Bernie. But Bernie gets food poisoning the second day. Maybe his Alpo wasn't cooked just right. Guess who gets voluntold to be his stand-in? You've got it. I had no idea how difficult it would be to skate while wearing a giant St. Bernard head, and I don't think the kids were too impressed with my puck shots. So, there you go. Bernie tops Cheer Bear any day. Confession number 3. Keeping with the Bernie-inspired theme, if you were a dog, what kind would you be? Me? A corgi. They're like the nerds of the dog world. Stubby legs, giant ears, and if a dog could smile, they'd take lessons from a corgi. Can't you just imagine one in the clarinet section? Your friend, the guy next door. Zack blew on the ink, waved the paper around just in case, then folded it up in a different shape this time. He made a dash back out to the mailbox, this time with shoes on. As he slipped the door latch back into place, he wondered if he seemed too eager. Would that put her off? But he couldn't resist the pull of excitement and anticipation for her next note. Back inside, he sent Laura a simple, "You've got mail," text, so she'd know the red flag was for her. Later that afternoon, he received a text in return. L. Bernie? How rude. He's not even one of the cool mascots. Zack couldn't hold back his wide grin, and he replied, Z. Don't diss Bernie. He and I bonded in a special way. A return text with a gif of a woman spitting out water all over her laptop. L. Was it doggy love at first sight? Z. Honestly, it was the keg of spiked hot cocoa tied around his neck that stole my heart. L. Now that's true love. How does Bernie feel about your preference for corgis? Should I arrange for couples counseling? Z. If it came down to a this, Bernie, or that, corgis, poll, I have to say Bernie would be disappointed in my choice. Corgis rule. Although they would rule even more if they all came with hot cocoa. Another gif appeared. This one of corgi puppies with the phrase, "Aw, shucks," scrolling across the bottom of the image. L. Don't waste your day away watching YouTube videos of puppies. You have work to get done for that flower shop across town. Z. The flower shop shouldn't worry. Everything is progressing well. Hope you have a great day. Don't prick your fingers on too many thorns. Even though he had plenty of work to keep him busy, he checked his phone often, hoping for another text. But none arrived. The mailbox also stayed empty until the next evening. This time when he opened the door, he discovered not a note, but a gift. He pulled out a ceramic mug and laughed when he saw the illustrated corgi wearing a bow tie and glasses with the inscription, Corgeek, along the bottom. Yep, it was basically a self-portrait. The mug was filled with single-serving packets of hot cocoa, and Laura's note. This was what he'd been waiting for. A sign that Laura wasn't just begrudgingly replying to questions. She was invested in their words, in their relationship. Hope welled inside him, filling him with warmth that even the hot cocoa couldn't match. Keep it slow and steady, Partridge, he reminded himself. After all, the turtle, or in this instance, the geeked-out corgi with short legs, won the race. If there was anything he desperately wanted to win, it was Laura's trust, and eventually, her heart. Chapter 6. Laura shifted where she was perched at the top of the stepladder. She took a nail from between her lips, held it carefully, then hammered it into the wall. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of renovations, flower creations, and rebranding decisions. Charlie's after-hours work on the shop was paying off. Even with Mr. Weaver's restrictions about what they could and couldn't do, Charlie pulled together a fabulous renovation. Just repainting the green walls to a creamy white changed the entire feel of the shop. The addition of custom crate shelves brought in the first taste of the personality Laura was going for. There were still more renovations to do, but so far, she was happy. As much as she loved the shop's transformation, it wasn't the most exciting part of the past 2 weeks. There had been 13 notes so far. She had no idea how long they could keep the letter exchange going. Her friendship with Zack wasn't just rekindled. It was a blazing bonfire. She had missed their banter and his sharp wit. She reached for the floral wall arrangement to hang as she thought over some of their confessions. How did you find out Santa Claus wasn't real? He found out when he was 10 years old and the tooth fairy didn't collect his tooth for a week. It was all deduction from there. She was 11 when her parents told her the truth. She became a Santa co-conspirator to hide gifts, then sneak them out under the tree and into stockings in the middle of the night. It kept the magic going for her younger siblings and for her, too. Which actor or actress would play you in a movie? She insisted Zack would be played by a young John Krasinski. He in turn said she was Emily Blunt, with pigtail braids. Laura thought Emily Blunt was pretty kick-ass, so she liked that answer, until Bree pointed out that John and Emily were a real-life couple. That left her with questions about Zack's motivations for his answers, questions she chose to leave unasked, because they were just friends. Just friends. What was the last show you binge-watched? What do you wish you were really good at? What's your biggest pet peeve? The questions just kept coming and coming. She had just replied to confession number 14 this morning and wondered what Zack's next question would be. The shop's bell jingled. "Hello," she called out. "I'll be right with you." She bent to the side, trying to get the nail into the arrangement loops. The pesky thing wasn't cooperating. Zack's smooth voice came from just behind her. "That looks precarious to me." She glanced down to find him at her feet, concern clouding his hazel eyes. "No worries, I'll be done in just a sec." She shifted again, this time getting the nails on both sides through the hanging loops, then released the wall decor. "I'm impressed," he said. "Does it surprise you that a girl can hang something all by her lonesome?" Laura blinked her eyes rapidly, like a southern belle using her wiles to get her way. He barked out a laugh. "I was referring to the arrangement. Sexist much?" "Moi?" She blinked a few more times and gestured to the words, "I may be wrong, but I doubt it," emblazoned across the front of her shirt. They both laughed, and it felt like there had never been a time when they hadn't been close friends. She descended the first 2 steps of the ladder, then turned her foot the wrong angle. She shrieked as the wobble turned into a full-on tilt. Strong arms wrapped around her and scooped her close, rescuing her from what surely would have been a nasty fall on the hard floor. She gripped the front of Zack's shirt, her heart beating 1,000,000 times a minute. Whether from the fall or from being wrapped in his arms, she didn't know. She pressed her forehead to his chest, trying to calm herself. The breath that left her lungs was deep and slow, laden with relief and, well, darn it all, anticipation. "Are you okay?" His warm voice fluttered the wisps of hair at the nape of her neck, raining tingles over her like rose petals falling from the sky. His hands moved over her back, pressing her closer to his chest. She caught a hint of light, spicy vanilla, which made her want to burrow further into the comfort and safety of his arms. She peeked through her lashes, realizing that if she just tilted her head up a bit more, his lips would be within the range of kissability. But friends didn't kiss friends. and she definitely wasn't budging past the friend zone. Before temptation could wield its powerful spell, she loosened her grip on his chest, found her footing, and edged away. Thank you. His eyes swirled with emotions she didn't want to define as she moved out of his hold. Her traitorous body whined that it missed his caress, and it almost leaned back in. But instead, she turned to fold up the stepladder. Be professional, Laura. He's your friend and your PR guy. Chill. So, what brings you into the shop today? Zack shoved his hands into the front pockets of his jeans, rocking back on his heels. I have the final logo for you to approve, and the first round of mock-ups for your website. I thought I'd stop by to show you in person. Laura bounced on her toes and clapped her hands. Yay! Should I get my laptop? She was already moving toward the front of the shop, but Zack beat her to the front counter. I've got it all on mine. He popped open his device, typed for a moment, then turned the laptop for her to view. Her hands flew to her mouth, and she gasped. The logo was a wreath of illustrated flowers in tones of teal, buttery yellow, magenta, and blush pink, surrounded by beautiful greenery. Oopsie Daisy filled the center of the wreath in a playful, swirly font. The website had a classic white background with the shop's logo proudly displayed at the top. The brand colors were repeated in banners, headings, and sections, making it all feel cohesive and easy to navigate. It's stunning. I love it, love it, love it! Zack's smile was wide, his eyes full of sunshine. She was tempted to jump the counter and throw her arms around him. A jingle announced another shop visitor, which turned out to be a friend. Her realtor, Victoria Lyons, greeted them both. As always, she looked posh in a button-down dress shirt and navy slacks with her auburn hair twisted up in a sleek bun. It looks like we're celebrating something. This amazing logo and website, Laura said, spinning the laptop to face Victoria. The logo is in good shape, he hurried to correct, but the website is still a work in progress. Victoria clicked around, smile growing as she did so. I love the concept. It's like an extension of you, Laura. Zack nodded. That was my goal. Now we need a photographer to take pictures of featured arrangements. Photography by Selena does my real estate listings. Highly recommend. I'd love to contact her, Laura said. Can you text me her contact info? Would you send it to me as well? I'd love to talk to her about what design look we need for the website. He checked his phone. I hate to rush out, but I have another client to meet with. Then I need to make a mail run. Laura fought hard not to blush when he winked at her, but everything with him was an ever-losing battle. No problem, Victoria responded, too busy composing the text to notice their interaction. Once the contact info was sent, Zack packed up his things and left. Victoria slipped her phone into her purse and looked around at the floral arrangements displayed on the farmhouse-style shelves. How's everything else going? How does it feel to be back in Crystal Creek? Laura motioned for her realtor to take a seat with her at the tiny consultation table set in a little nook of the store. I'm still unpacking my house. I think that's going to be the case for several months since my focus is on the shop, but I love the house. It's perfect. A wide smile brightened Victoria's already lovely face. I'm so glad. How about the shop? I see you've made some big changes. Yes, Charlie's been amazing. She has so many ideas and is wonderful to work with. Laura's smile faded slightly. It's just been tough that Mr. Weaver is so picky about what I can or can't do. Maybe in a few years I'll look for another venue. She shrugged. But for now, I'm just happy to see my dream come to life. Victoria leaned forward. Tell me more about what you'd do if you could. Laura walked her through the back of the shop, talking through her ideas, changes she'd like to make, and even her ideal shop. Victoria listened attentively, asking follow-up questions and validating her vision. Eventually, they ended up in the front of the shop again. There's a project coming up. Victoria hesitated, drumming her fingers on the front counter once, twice, 3 times, then stopped. It's not a secret. It just hasn't officially been announced yet. We're waiting for the final city council approvals. If I tell you about it, could you keep it on the down low? The announcement should be out next month. I'm super intrigued. Mum's the word, Laura replied, making a zipping motion across her lips. Victoria laughed. Do the mums here keep secrets? They are known to be the guardians of the most classified and juiciest of secrets, she said, waggling her eyebrows up and down. Well, if they're that well regarded, Victoria smiled. Do you remember the street of older homes on Taylor Avenue, next to Crystal Creek Park. Laura scrunched her forehead, thinking through the geography of that area. That row of brick houses that back up to the creek? Just a couple streets over from where my house is, right? That's the one. There are 16 houses in the 2 blocks just before the park. They're all old, and many have fallen into disrepair as their older homeowners couldn't keep up with the maintenance. A private investor purchased those 2 blocks. Laura gasped. Please tell me he isn't tearing them all down. They're so pretty. Not at all. The investor loves the street just as it is. Well, mostly. The plan is to renovate the homes into a quaint shopping district, and the owner wants the businesses to be all locally owned. No chain stores. Everything family-friendly. Victoria tilted her head, regarding her. I do believe a local flower shop would fit in perfectly. Laura had never heard of a more amazing, too-good-to-be-true opportunity. She looked around Oopsie Daisy, at the new paint she loved and the old, scuffed trim she still longed to change. What's the catch? The investor wants business owners who are invested in Crystal Creek, so you'd have to sign a long-term lease, at least 7 to 10 years. They want a solid business plan to be submitted with your lease application, but if you sign a 10-year lease, the investor will cover a significant portion of the renovation costs. When the project is announced, you really could choose your location and work with one of our renovators to have the entire shop set up exactly how you envision it. What's the startup timeline? We're shooting for our first grand opening to be in 6 to 9 months. We plan to open in 2 stages. Ideally, the block of homes closest to the park will be stage 1, and the other block of homes will be stage 2. That will keep the construction mess at a minimum for the businesses in stage 1. Wow. Just wow, Laura said, unable to conjure up more intelligent words. The project sounded oh so tempting, but the sheer amount of work it would take to relocate, not to mention the financial impact, made her brain short-circuit. Besides, she was locked into a 3-year lease for her current shop. Victoria patted her hand. There's no rush. Just let me know if you'd like more information. Also, before I leave, we have a women in business meeting coming up next week. I'd love to have you attend. It's a great way to get to know other women, brainstorm ways to promote each other, and also do a lot of community service. I would love that. Thanks. They said their goodbyes as Victoria slipped out the door. Laura glanced at her watch, noting it was just a few minutes before closing, so she flipped the sign over, engaged the locks and alarm. She quickly tidied up the back, swept the front, and checked her orders for the next 2 days. All the while, thoughts about the upcoming grand reopening of Oopsie Daisy warred with visions of a new dream location. She'd worked so hard to be able to take over the Crystal Creek floral shop. Would it be wise to completely change direction so soon after opening her business? Victoria was right. There was time to worry about it later. She needed to focus on one thing at a time, and right now, the next pressing thing on her list was to check a certain mailbox for another confession. Chapter 7. What qualities attract you to someone you date? Zack stared at the question, second-guessing whether to scratch it out or leave it. The vibes between him and Laura had changed significantly since the notes began. He really wanted to take the next step toward moving out of the friend zone and into the more than friend zone, which would hopefully lead into the committed dating zone. If things went really well, then into the bling on her finger zone. Before he could get too ahead of himself or continue to waffle any longer, he wrote his side of the confession. A woman with a great sense of humor is what catches my attention first. Someone who knows her self-worth and isn't afraid to stand up for what she deserves. She cares about others, isn't afraid to work hard, and her smile instantly makes me feel like whatever is happening in life will be okay because she's by my side. Clarinet skills and adorable braided pigtails are a definite bonus. He stared at the words as the ink dried, his heart pounding like a snare drummer calling the band to attention. Was it too much? Maybe. Would she open it and decide to put her house on the market to escape him? He really hoped not. He carefully folded the note, taking the time to press the lines so they were nice and neat. This one note had the power to change the tone of their relationship forever. It would either move them into the dating step he hoped for, or it would break what they already had. He hoped for the first, because he didn't think he could handle living next door to Laura and never being anything more than neighbors passing by each other as they lived separate lives. He even said a brief prayer before closing the lid of the mailbox, the note tucked safely inside. It took all his willpower not to check the red flag status every 5 minutes. Instead, he checked it every 10 minutes. Sometimes he even made it to 15. He finally decided to go to the gym to work out all the extra energy coursing through him. When he returned home, the headlights of his truck illuminated the fence line as he pulled into the driveway. The red flag was down. The note had been delivered. "Dude, what is wrong with you?" Graydon asked, his sharp elbow digging into Zack's side. Yet another cousin proposed a toast to Uncle Graham and Aunt Gretchen, wishing them safe travels as they prepared to embark on a 3-month anniversary trip to Europe. Zack rubbed his eyes and stifled another yawn, trying to stay focused on the family event. "I didn't sleep well last night." Not well was an understatement. It was more like not at all. Anxiety kept him awake until about 2 in the morning, when the few hours he did sleep were filled with dreams about letters and tea parties a la Alice in Wonderland. It had been 24 hours, and the mailbox continued to be mail-less. "Laura troubles? What makes you think that?" Even as he spoke, Zack became distracted yet again by thoughts of her. Was she still at the shop? Was she as distracted as he had been all day long? Was she thinking about him and maybe responding to his note? Or was she on a bus halfway to Ohio by now? Graydon's eyebrows rose and fell in quick succession as he spoke. "Only the fact that for the last 3 weeks you've either talked about her, the work you're doing for her shop, or her and the work you're doing for her shop. You rarely ever talk about other clients when you're at the foundation. I may be a hockey guy, but my brain works just fine when it comes to my cousin and what's happening in his life. So what gives?" "Nothing gives. Are you ready to take over brisket and noodles for the next 3 months?" Graydon's stink-eye stare didn't need any work at all. If Zack hadn't been the recipient of it throughout his entire life, he probably would have spilled the beans. Instead, he held steady, not breaking eye contact. "Fine, you win," Graydon conceded. "But when you do decide to talk, just know I'm here. As for the restaurant, I'm not worried. It's going to be easier than running the hockey camps." Zack barked out a laugh. "I think working with 150 teenagers is easier than working with Chef Mike." Ahem. He turned to find Chef Mike standing directly behind him, the cook's beefy tattooed arms folded across the front of his white chef's coat. Busted. "We're short-handed at the takeout desk," Chef Mike said gruffly, directing his comment to Graydon. "No problem. I've got a volunteer right here." Graydon clapped his hand on Zack's shoulder, pushing him toward the front lobby. Zack started to protest, but Chef narrowed his eyes. If there was ever a man whose glare scared the boogers out of him, it was Chef Mike's. As a kid, it had been firmly drilled into him that you didn't go into the chef's kitchen without being specifically invited, and whatever he said was law. The restaurant may have been owned by his aunt and uncle, but it was always clear who the real boss was. Sorry, Aunt Gretchen. Just a few blinks later, Zack was stationed at the to-go desk, processing orders and greeting customers who came to pick up meals. They weren't that busy, so he was confused why the other 2 employees working the hosting desk couldn't handle the flow. But he wasn't about to complain to Chef Mike. Instead, he busied himself restocking the utensil packs and napkins. He grinned mischievously once the bins were chock full enough to last for the next 3 days. If Chef happened to open the napkins, he just might receive a papery white avalanche. "Hi, I have an order to pick up." That voice. He tripped over his feet as he spun to see if his ears were playing tricks on him. But no, there she was, all rosy-cheeked from the early April hair with her caramel blonde pigtails that he wanted to reach out and tug. Laura gasped, her pretty pink lips forming a cute little O of surprise. They both blinked at each other, then started talking at the same time. "What are you—" she began. "How are you?" he asked. Laughter broke their awkward, "I haven't seen you since the note was delivered" moment. "It's been a busy day," she said, taking the lead. "I had a funeral order come through, as well as arrangements for a ritzy baby shower, along with the usual walk-ins and phone orders. On top of all that, I received an email from Mr. Weaver saying that he sold the building." Her sigh was heavy. "What? To whom?" he asked, stunned by her announcement. "He didn't say. I even popped over to the bistro next door to see if they knew anything, but their email was just as ambiguous as mine." The sigh she let out was heavy. "I guess I'll just have to wait to hear from the new owner." Between hustling to get orders completed and stressing about the building, it was really nice to get a call from the restaurant offering me a complimentary dinner as a new local business owner. Zack quirked an eyebrow up. He'd never heard of the restaurant doing that before. Let me see if I can find your order, he said. Hey, Laura. Graydon smoothly joined them at the takeout station, shooting Zack a wink. I'm so glad you could make it tonight. Zack glowered as she turned to his cousin with a bright, sunshiny smile. I was just telling Zack how crazy my day has been. This is a total lifesaver. I probably would have gone home, had a bowl of cereal, and fallen into bed. Well, let me do you one better then. We're having a big party in the back room for my parents. They're heading off for an extended anniversary trip. There's a giant buffet set up. You should come say hi to everyone. I bet you'll remember my sisters and a bunch of cousins from school. Then you can save this meal for tomorrow. Her eyes widened and she shook her head. Oh, no. I don't want to barge in on a family affair. Zack shifted to the end of the counter, behind Laura, and mouthed, What are you doing? Graydon clearly saw and ignored him. It's less of a family get-together and more of an excuse for no one to have to cook. And don't worry, there are lots of friends dropping in and out too. Graydon threaded Laura's arm through his and began leading her away from the takeout counter. Besides, I'd love to chat with you about providing floral arrangements for our weekend crowds. Maybe weekly with Thursday deliveries. Oh, and Zack. Graydon glanced briefly over his shoulder. Why don't you put Laura's meal in the kitchen cooler and meet us in the party room? He turned his attention back to Laura. He's always looking for an excuse to avoid our grandmother pinching his cheeks and interrogating him about his life choices. Zack blinked as Graydon led a wide-eyed Laura away, gabbing on about something or other. What in the world had just happened? I'll take this. Chef Mike appeared and whisked away Laura's order. Are you just going to stand there like an idiot while your cousin takes your girl off to be swarmed by a family? His family. Laura. In the same room. He darted into the banquet room, quickly scanning and locating Laura, who was being introduced to his grandmother. Of course. He sucked in a deep breath, prayed for courage, and joined the group. Oh, Zack, dear. Grandma Partridge reached up for a nice chunk of cheek, wiggling it from side to side before releasing it and giving him a light pat. I see your relationship status still involves a computer. He felt like the Sahara Desert currently resided on his face. Grandma, he ground out. She ignored him, turning her attention to Laura, who seemed to be choking on air, and Graydon, who looked like he'd won box office tickets to the Stanley Cup. That boy is more interested in playing around with his electronic graphic-y stuff than meeting nice girls like you. Now, I ask, how is that going to help him woo a pretty girl and get me some great grandchildren to love on? He was going to kill Graydon. But first, he needed to rescue Laura. Hey, have you seen Greer around? You guys were on the yearbook committee together, right? I bet you'd just love to catch up with her. He quickly said goodbye to his grandmother and steered Laura across the room toward a semi-quiet corner. I am so sorry. I don't know what Graydon was thinking. He's taken too many hockey pucks to the head or something. She stayed silent, biting her lip. I know, they're terrible. It's worse than that TV show, you know, the Goldberg family. Well, a cross between that and those family reunion Christmas shows. I mean, they're not all bad. Usually Graydon is the sane one, but even I'm questioning that right now. He glanced down at Laura, her face going from pink to red to almost purple. He grabbed her shoulders. Breathe, Laura. Meeting my family would be a terrible way to die. She snorted. Literally had to wipe the snot off her face kind of snort. Then, gut-wrenching laughter poured out. At first, it was cute. But then she just kept laughing, and it kind of felt insulting. After all, they were his family. What's up with her? His teenage cousin Chloe asked. I think Grandma and Graydon broke her. Broke me? Laura wheezed out through the laughter. Chloe just shrugged as if this was a normal occurrence. Yeah, they're like a lethal combination. Like, I limit the number of family gatherings I attend if they're both going to be there. 'Cause seriously, who needs that drama? Tweet, tweet. She whipped out a phone from her back pocket. Sweet! There's like the best ever sale going on at the mall. What do you think my chances are of ditching all these oldies to meet up with my friends? Oh, oldies! Laura covered her face with her hands. Zack's attention bounced back and forth between his cousin's questions and patting Laura on the back. Talk to Chef and volunteer to do a meal delivery. Just one. That will get you out of here pretty quick. Chloe's mouth dropped open. That's a wicked awesome idea. Thanks, cuz. Alone again with Laura, Zack gently wrapped his fingers around her wrists and pulled them away. "Hey there," he said softly. "You okay?" Wet streaks lined her cheeks from all that laughing. She nodded, taking a few deep breaths to calm down. Then she grabbed the edge of her "I can't be held responsible for what my face does when you talk" shirt, exposing the flat of her stomach as she lifted it to wipe the tears from her face. A gentleman would offer to get some tissues, but right at that moment, his feet didn't want to move an inch from this little corner he shared with her. "Oh, my heavens, Zack, your family!" One last laugh trembled out before she cleared her throat. "I've known your family forever. Crystal Creek isn't that big, you know. But to see the dynamics of you all together like this," she waved to the room at large. "The way you love each other is the best thing ever. Do you see it?" He looked around at the people he loved most in the world. Little cousins chasing each other between the tables, his grandmother accosting another unsuspecting victim, Aunt Gretchen snuggling up a little baby while she and Uncle Graham moved from one group to another to socialize. There were definitely times when his family drove him batty, but if any one of them called on him for help, he'd be there in an instant. Instead of saying something mushy like that, he shrugged. "They're my people." "You're lucky to have them." "I am," he agreed. Her sincere blue eyes captured him, and all he wanted to say was that they could be her people too. He reached out and snagged her hand in his other hand playing with her fingertips. Being near her was like sitting in the clarinet section before band practice. His body hummed with the anticipation of music to come. Touching her ignited that melody. The electricity of the notes pumped straight through his veins, giving him the courage to blurt out the words, "So, girl next door, have you replied to my confession yet?" Chapter 8. She stifled a gasp. Zack had tangled his fingers with hers. Was this the first time he'd held her hand? The prom disaster certainly didn't count, because he'd wanted to be there with someone else, and she was just a poor substitute. Even though before she realized that, it was the best date of her entire life. And seriously, her brain needed to slow down and stop overthinking everything. Like holding hands. This was their first real holding hands moment, so that made yesterday's confession note even more profound and questionable. Was he saying he liked her? Like for reals? Not just fun friend Laura? He gave a little tug, pulling her closer. To make it all the more confusing, he looked so openly vulnerable as he waited for her answer. "Not yet," she admitted. Her fingers flexed around his before sliding free and hiding in the safety of her back pocket. Being off in the corner, just the two of them, made her feel like they were in a safe little bubble. But bubbles could be popped. And she knew it wouldn't be long before another one of his family members appeared to do just that. He mirrored her stance, hands in his pockets, but tilted his head closer. "Can I ask why?" "Sometimes words are hard, you know?" He nodded, but the vulnerability persisted. "Just know they don't have to be perfect. I know you." Like the fact that there's an entire list of pros and cons running through your mind. Just this once, could you write down your initial thoughts and feelings? The ones that are most sincerely you? Her unfiltered, straight from Laura's brain words? Honestly, just one word. You. All of Zack's qualities were what most attracted her, not just to someone or anyone, only to him. It was all in the details. The way he listened to her, acknowledged her opinions, challenged her in respectful ways, supported her, encouraged her. Her brain's most sincere response was simply, "Zack?" But no, those thoughts were impetuous, incorrigible, greedy. If she let them rule her actions, it would be disastrous. Or utterly blissful. She shoved that last thought down, down, down. Logic and reason were the safest way to forge ahead. Perhaps she could try to put those words in her confession to Zack. Maybe find a way to express herself that came off a little more balanced, understated, and not like a crazy teen clinging to her crush. "I'll try," she finally agreed. Just in time, too, because Greer jumped in, giving her a giant hug and pulling her away to catch up. Over the next hour, she found the circle of people around her constantly ebbing and flowing, the conversations ranging from funny high school memories to more adult topics and experiences. Sometimes Zack was by her side. Other times, he was off playing with his younger nieces, nephews, and cousins. One of the times he was with her, Zack introduced her to Sheila Montoyas, aka the gorgeous Hispanic woman Laura had seen leaving his house a few weeks ago. Sheila immediately leaned in to greet her with a kiss on the cheek, and Laura realized it was just how she greeted everyone. Sheila was the public relations manager at Graydon's nonprofit, the DG Foundation, and she and Zack collaborated together. He focused on the digital and print media, while Sheila specialized in arranging appearances and interviews. As Laura observed their interactions, she realized there were no flirty vibes going on between her and Zack. The level of relief she felt about Zack not having a romantic relationship made her feel slightly uncomfortable. Hypocritical, maybe? And dang it all, if she couldn't keep from scanning the room to locate him when he wasn't by her side. "He's a pretty good guy, you know," Graydon said, coming to stand beside her. The circle of people had briefly ebbed, as others were called on to help with cleanup, and Zack was currently wrangling youngsters into coats. "I agree," she replied, turning to face the sneaky conspirator of the evening. "Are you ever going to let him explain what happened with prom?" She sighed. "Why can't people just let it go? It was high school, for heaven's sake." "It was more significant than that for both of you, and you know it. You really need to hear the full story." His words sat heavy between them. "What story?" Zack asked from behind her. Laura startled, making his eyes sparkle with merriment. "Did you do that on purpose?" She playfully glared at him. He shrugged, then handed her the takeout bag of food. "I can't help it that you scare so easily. Chef Mike wanted to be sure you got this." "Oh, thank you. I'm looking forward to having it tomorrow." Zack glanced suspiciously between the two of them. "So what were you guys talking about?" Before Laura could reply, Graydon jumped in. "We were talking about my parents' trip and the restaurant. I was just telling her that she needed to hear the full story of how brisket and noodles came to be. Maybe when they return and we have their welcome home party." "That would be fun," she responded, thankful for his quick thinking. "I'll hold you to it," Graydon said, before wishing her good night. "Zack, make sure to say goodbye to everybody before you head out." "I was planning to stay and help with the rest of the cleanup." "Nah, we got it covered," he replied before heading over to say goodnight to other family members. It was just the two of them. Laura shuffled her feet a bit and moved the takeout bag to her other hand. "So, I guess I'm going to head home too," she said, feeling lame. "Thanks for the fun night." Zack shoved his hands deep into the front pockets of his jeans. "Yeah, thanks for staying." She took a step back, intending to make her exit, but she hesitated. The ball was in her court, right? "Or maybe you could come over to my house. You're heading home soon, right?" His eyebrows shot up. "It will take me about 20 minutes to wade through all the pinched cheeks and hugs." "That should give me enough time to whip up some homemade hot cocoa. If you're lucky, I'll even make some popcorn." His grin was ginormous. "Deal. See you soon." Laura had just set the tray of goodies on the living room coffee table when the doorbell rang. She wiped her damp palms across her denim-clad thighs, steeling her nerves. A gush of wind pushed against the door as she answered it, revealing a red-cheeked, bundled-up Zack. She ushered him in, closing the door quickly behind him. His hair was all tousled, making his usual sexy bedhead hairstyle look all crazy wackadoo. She desperately wanted to reach up to smooth it back into place, or maybe grab a chunk, pull him down to her level, and press her lips to his. Heat ricocheted through her as she gripped the door handle, hoping it would keep her anchored in place so she wouldn't maul Zack. "Rein it in," she commanded herself. She was a mature, college-educated woman. She could invite an attractive man over without freaking out, right? She peeled her fingers from their death grip on the handle. "You have good timing. I just finished the cocoa." "Is it the same kind you made during those crazy just-above-freezing football playoffs?" "This is a quick version of that, but I think it tastes just as good." She poured the cocoa from its teapot into a mug before handing it to him. "There are mini marshmallows if you'd like." She quickly poured herself a mug and topped it off with a generous handful of marshmallows. She settled back into the corner of the sofa, tucking a foot under her bent leg as she half-turned to face Zack. Her knee bumped against his, where he also sat angled toward her in the other corner. Rumbled from him as he sipped the cocoa. "This is just as good as I remember." "Thanks." Cozy warmness filled the space between them. "So, you survived my crazy family." His words were accompanied by a mischievous glint in his eyes. I don't remember Graydon being quite so sneaky. I'm trying to decide if you get that from him or if he gets it from you." "Neither. We inherited that trait from our grandmother." She laughed, remembering the spunky older lady. "Oh, I definitely believe that. Are all your cousins as devious?" "To varying degrees. I'd say sneaky surprises and pranks run through all our veins." She shook her head in mock sympathy. "I feel sorry for all your poor in-laws. How do they survive your family's antics?" The glint in his eyes increased. "I guess you'll have to let me know." Warmth infused her cheeks at his implication. Not sure how to respond, she ducked her head, busying herself with another sip of cocoa. The marshmallows were at the perfect melting point, all gooey perfection. Unfortunately, that meant she ended up with a marshmallow mustache. Her tongue darted out, trying to get the sticky bits of sugar. Zack set his mug down on the coffee table, turning toward her. "There's a bit right there." She froze as his thumb brushed along the top edge of her lip. He brought his thumb to his mouth, licking away the sugary confection. It felt like sparklers zinged between them as he lowered his hand. Her eyes were locked on his. Did he feel this crazy electricity too? "Laura," he said softly, "we need to talk." She nodded, unable to make words move from where they formed in her brain to where they were supposed to come out of her mouth. Why did she lose her ability to function whenever he was around? It was horrifying to realize all those cheesy romance novels she loved were actually spot on. It was equally horrifying to realize how often she thought of their relationship as romantic rather than platonic, and how she really, really hoped he was about to tell her she wasn't the only one with those thoughts. She set her mug on the coffee table, then cleared her throat, hoping her brain and mouth were functioning again. They were, and it opened the floodgates. "Maybe we should start with prom. I mean, it was so long ago, but everyone keeps bringing it up, so let me just start, okay? I totally get you were into Laura Abramson. She had that whole smexy cheerleader thing going on, and you guys spent a lot of time together for class and stuff. And I guess it's part of why I was so excited when you asked me to prom. Well, accidentally asked me. Seriously, I don't know why I didn't put it together that you didn't mean me, Laura, but when I found out you really meant her, Laura, I felt like such an idiot. Because of course you meant for the promposal to go to the girl you had been flirting with all year." Zack's finger placed over her lips brought the info dump to a halt. Thank goodness. Her brain and mouth were clearly still having communication issues. All she'd wanted was to give a lead into the topic, not deliver an entire epistle. She averted her gaze, zeroing in on a loose thread along her t-shirt seam. Picking at it seemed like the most important thing in the world at the moment. Except his finger slipped from her lips, leaving a tingly trail as it traced a path along her jaw. It hooked under her chin, lifting it so their eyes reconnected. "If anyone was an idiot," Zack said, "it was me. I didn't even think about dating until Laura started flirting during our study sessions." His hand dropped to rest on the couch just beside her knee. "Yes, I originally intended the promposal to go to her, Laura, but by the time prom arrived, my feelings had very much changed. I was happy to be going with my best friend." He had been happy? Not disappointed that he got stuck with her? She blinked, trying to process this new information. What changed? Focusing on his next words proved to be difficult as his thumb traced circles across her knee. "I figured out she wasn't serious. She already had a boyfriend. The weird thing was, I thought I'd be heartbroken, but I wasn't." Laura almost rolled her eyes. "You poor thing, getting your heart not broken that way." "No, that was your job." "What?" She shook her head, certain she'd heard wrong. "How exactly did I break your heart?" "You left," he said, his gaze steady, sincere. "That night when you walked down those stairs in your gown, it was like a switch flipped. I escorted you into the dance thinking I had to be the luckiest guy in the world, and the whole date proved me right. I realized you weren't just the girl from band or math or whatever other class we had together. You were the girl. And there we were, getting ready to graduate with the whole summer ahead to figure out our new relationship." She bowed her head, reliving the pain from that night. A heavy feeling settled in her stomach as she considered the anguish he must have felt. Until the cat was let out of the bag. And no matter what I did, you refused to speak to me. You left, and my heart was broken. Okay, pause. We were in high school. Are you sure it wasn't just, I don't know, the magic of prom night? I tried that rationalization, he said. I told myself we were young. I had the next 4 years of college and an entire lifetime to find the girl. But after dating a few times, I realized truly connecting with someone else was rare. I graduated, moved back to Crystal Creek, and honestly, I was beginning to think I'd never fall for someone again. The corner of his lips quirked up. But then a moving truck arrived and changed everything. Seeing you pop out from behind those boxes was like watching you come down those stairs on prom night. Only this time, the switch that was flipped was something inside that told me everything was going to be all right. My person was back. Zack. His name whooshed out, soft and breathy. Could it really be this easy? Could they just say the words and life would move on with them together? All perfect and wonderful? Could she trust him enough for that? His hand moved to cover her knee as he leaned in until their foreheads touched. Soft hazel eyes met hers, their lips just inches apart. Her heart felt like it was filled with butterflies desperate to burst free. What if she just tilted her head and shifted forward a bit more? As much as her body desperately wanted her to make that move, she just couldn't do it. Laura? Yes, she replied, her eyelids fluttering closed even as she urged them to stay open. His fingertips trailed up her neck, eventually slipping into the edge of her hair, tilting her face up toward his. She waited for him to close the gap, to feel his lips brush against hers. But the kiss didn't come. When she opened her eyes to see what the holdup was, she gasped. His hazel eyes were blazing like molten gold. Without a word, she felt a transfusion of fiery devotion, need, and yearning. Deliberately, slowly, he lowered his head, but their lips never connected. Instead, he placed a soft kiss to the base of her neck. She sucked in a deep breath as the tip of his nose traced a path upwards until his lips nuzzled a sensitive spot just below her earlobe. Laura, he said again, like a prayer she felt compelled to answer. All she could manage was something akin to a whimper. Every cell, every molecule of her body was hyper-focused on where his breath whispered, where his lips rested on her skin. She desperately wanted to kiss him, but was she ready to love him? He pulled back, almost as if her thoughts had traveled on radio waves from her mind to his. As he blinked, the molten hotness cooled. She felt bereft as his fingers loosened, slipping free from where they cupped her face. Instead, he lifted her hand, placing a gentle kiss on its back. Laura, I really, really need you to answer my note. Chapter 9. And then he left. Actually grabbed his coat and was out of there. Laura took a giant bite of her decadent chocolate cupcake. She had already demolished half of it before she even sat down at a sweet confections table with her best friend. Bree's eyes were wide. No way. He didn't. Yes way, Laura replied, chocolate crumbs flying from her mouth. She brushed them off her t-shirt, which ironically declared, Florist, I don't just create bouquets, I create emotions. She'd really been through the emotional ringer in the past 24 hours. And now I don't know what to do. He said he wants me to answer his note, that we need to talk more. She used air quotes to emphasize his words. What guy says that? I mean, aren't they supposed to be all about the kissy stuff? Not the good ones. Rachel, the co-owner of the little cafe, appeared at their table, sliding a plate of macarons, chocolate bombs, and other pastry delights between them. Sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but it's a small shop, and you're the only ones hanging out at the moment. It sounds like you need full-on relationship therapy, which, in my opinion, requires a lot of sugar. On the house. The unexpected kindness made Laura's eyes sting as she blinked back a sudden rush of tears. Thank you. Rachel patted her shoulder, turned to leave, but swung back to face her. So, small shop, small town. I'm guessing you're talking about Zack Partridge, right? I just want to say from what I've heard, he really does like you. Laura's eyes widened. Does everyone know about us? Bree shrugged, picking up a yellow macaron. It's Crystal Creek. Everyone knows everything. Rachel gave a small laugh. It certainly feels that way sometimes. Chloe, Zach's cousin, was in a cake decorating class I taught at the high school last week. Let's just say that girl talks a lot and really, really fast. At some point, she said she hoped you like Zach as much as he likes you. And some other stuff I didn't completely catch. So, for what it's worth, it sounds like he's really into you. I hope that helps. And if it doesn't, well, she gestured once more to the plate. Sugar. As Rachel returned to the kitchen, Laura plopped her chin into the palm of her hand, considering which confection to dive into. So, let's start by stating the obvious. Bree wrapped her hands around her chai latte. Zach likes you. It would appear so. Laura chose a deep pink macaron, hoping it was raspberry. And he told you that? Yep. And there was a lot of stuff that led up to an almost kiss? Laura paused, the macaron halfway to her lips. If by stuff Bree meant how he had traced his way over some of the most sensitive exposed areas of her skin, then yeah, it had been hotter than hot. Memories of their close encounter still sent feverish waves tumbling through her. She shoved the macaron into her mouth, trying to divert her focus to the zing of sugar rather than the zing of hormones. Yep, she said around the treat. So he laid his feelings out there. What did you say in return? She tried to push aside the hormonal surges from the night before to focus on their actual conversation. You were the girl. We had the whole summer ahead to figure out our new relationship. You left, and my heart was broken. I was beginning to think I'd never fall for someone again. My person was back. He really did like her. Maybe even a little something more. Nothing. I said nothing. Laura lifted wide eyes to her best friend. Bree's expression was sympathetic and almost sad. I need to tell you two things. Don't hate me, okay? Okay. Bree shook her head. You have to promise. Besties for life. Now you're starting to worry me. Just promise, okay? Besties for life, Laura said firmly. Okay. First, you need to stop waffling. You loved him in high school, and yeah, that was teenage Laura, but teenage Laura had good instincts about people. Trust her. Don't let your insecurities get the best of you. Also, if he says he enjoyed prom with you, I believe it, but either way, that was the past. You need to figure out how you feel now. Since I know you best, I'm pretty sure you have a whole lot of lovey-dovey feelings for a particular clarinet geek. If so, stop letting fear get in your way. Laura tilted her head, considering Bree's advice, admitting her best friend was right on so many levels. Bree reached across the table and clutched Laura's hand in hers. You need to do all that, okay? Because the second thing is a big thing. Anxiety grabbed Laura's heart as her friend's eyebrows scrunched up, like she was afraid to say whatever came next. Bree's words tumbled out quickly. I was the one who switched the names on Zach's promposal. I was the one who set you both up. Laura jerked her hand back. You did what? Don't hate me. Bree took a deep breath. I was in charge of the choir's promposal orders that year. When I saw Zach's order come through, I cringed. I knew Laura Abramson had a boyfriend, and I felt so bad. Like, sending the a cappella group to perform the promposal was setting him up to fail. But then I had the most brilliant idea ever. Or, so I thought. Bree shrugged, her shoulders settling into a slump. I thought if I switched the last name from Abramson to Anderson, I'd not only save Zach, but I'd make my bestie's dream come true. I really, really hoped that it would be the nudge the two of you needed to end up together. Laura could only stare. Why didn't you tell me? You totally shut Zach out. I was afraid if I told you the truth, you'd hate me. I couldn't take the chance that you'd move to Kansas City for college and never speak to me again. I know that was super selfish, and I'm sorry. Wow. Laura slumped back into the chair. Just, wow. Can you forgive me, please? I'll be your weekend flower slave for the rest of my life to make it up to you. And bake you cookies, although they'll probably end up burned, so maybe I should promise weekly runs to Sweet Confections instead? Oh, Bree. Laura couldn't help but laugh just the tiniest bit as she rubbed her hands over her face. What a mess. She dropped her hands to the table, then reached for a chocolate bomb. This whole thing definitely required a lot more sugar. Yes, I forgive you, she said, then popped the bomb into her mouth, letting the sugar soothe her anxiety. Because really, Bree was right. It was time to move forward. There were still things to work through, but she was resolved to stay centered in the here and now, rather than continuing to look back. Relief spread across her best friend's face. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. She let out a big sigh. I was so afraid you were going to hate me. Lucky you, Rachel had already supplied me with a plate full of angst remedies. Laura looked at the remaining treats, wondering if they'd be enough to bolster her courage when she got back to the shop and picked up a pen. It was time to write her own confession. Chapter 10. Zack had been working all afternoon on Oopsie Daisy's new website, uploading and organizing images as well as customizing the order page. It was probably the most tedious part of his job, repeating the same functions over and over, but it was necessary to create a high-end product. He'd need to meet up with Laura later to add descriptions and pricing. Laura. He dropped his head into his hands, pulling hard on his hair. It had just about killed him to resist kissing her the night before, but he knew if he had followed through only for her to decide she didn't want to be together, the kiss would have haunted him forever. Then again, what if the opportunity never came again? His stomach clenched, rebelling against the thought of not having her as part of his life. This falling in love stuff really sucked. Knock knock, special delivery. He looked up to find Bree standing outside his office holding a flower arrangement. Come in, he said, gesturing to the seat in front of his desk. What's this? She set the bouquet on the desk before settling into the seat. You've got mail. I guess it wouldn't fit in the mailbox. He reached for the vase, turning the extravagant arrangement around to admire it from all angles before spying the attached note. He wanted to open it right then, but also didn't want an audience. Are you making floral deliveries for the shop now? He asked, trying to be casual while silently praying for Bree to leave. No, this is part of my penance. When he quirked his eyebrow, she shrugged. I already confessed to Laura, so you'll find out sooner or later. I was the one who switched the names on the promposal. Zack's eyes widened as she explained what had happened and why she'd chosen to do it. When she finished, he got up and pulled her into a hug. Thanks, he said. That was one of the best gifts anyone has given me. Wow, really? I don't want to imagine my life now had I not found the right Laura. Bree flushed. Aw, thanks, Zack. And just so you know, I'm totally rooting for you two. I should go and let you read Laura's note. He restrained his nod and politely saw her out the door. Once he was alone, he pulled the note from the card holder, unfolded it, and smoothed it flat on top of his desk. To the guy next door. Did you know every flower represents an emotion or life event? Creating flower arrangements to convey the right message is something I love about being a florist. You asked me what qualities attract me to someone. You also asked for my unfiltered response. This was the closest I could come. The arrangement I made for you contains the following flowers. Sunflower, happiness. I think that's the first quality I look for. Do I feel happy around that person? Do I make him feel the same way? White chrysanthemums, optimism and joy. A good relationship should spark both of those feelings, not just for me, but for the person I'm with, too. White daisies and daffodils. They stand for loyalty and devotion, which to me also means trust. A relationship should have a strong foundation of trust, loyalty, and devotion. That's how it lasts. Pink peonies are so soft and pretty, it's only natural they represent romance. It's like that tingly feeling of anticipation when the person you love is nearby. Finally, aster and red carnations stand for patience and admiration. Both are important. I want a relationship where we support and care for each other, and have patience and grace when needed, too. When I think of all those qualities, I think of just one person. You. Zack suddenly felt buoyant, like he was soaring on a glider through the clouds. She wanted him. Zack Partridge. Were his dreams finally coming true? He forced his eyes back to the note. He desperately needed to see what her next words were. Confession number 16. What's something about you I don't know? My answer? I started collecting my silly t-shirts because of you. During our first band camp together, I showed up with a shirt that had a cat on it holding a bone. It said, I found this humorous, and it totally made you laugh. We started swapping corny jokes and didn't stop for 4 years. I loved making you smile, smirk, snort, whatever. Your sense of humor was what started my crush on you. And after that first day, I was always on the lookout for fun shirts. It's a habit I've never been able to break. And each time I discover something awesome, I think of you. Looking forward to your response. The girl next door. Zack pulled out a yellow business tablet he kept in a drawer. His pen hovered above the paper as he contemplated how to respond. He looked over her note, then to the bouquet, identifying each of the flowers she described, pondering the qualities they stood for. He let the pen drop to the desk and pushed back his chair. He tucked her note into his pocket. Some messages needed to be delivered in person. When he entered Oopsie Daisy, Laura was just handing a large bouquet of red and pink roses over to an elderly gentleman. "Happy anniversary," she said, a beautiful smile lighting her face. The gentleman thanked her, nodding to Zack as he left the shop. When she spied him by the door, her cheeks flushed an adorable pink. "Any chance we can talk privately?" he asked. Sure." She glanced around the store to be sure it was currently empty, then reached under the counter and pulled out a "Be back in 15 minutes" sign. "Could you hang this on the door? We can talk in the back." Anxiety and excitement filled him as he hung the sign, flipped the lock on the door, and followed her to the back room. There were so many things he needed to say, and some important questions too. Her answers would guide how he responded and where the future of their relationship was headed. Maybe he should have written it down after all. Laura stood by the work table, twirling some ribbon around her finger in a nervous gesture. He leaned back against the counter facing her. "I got your note," he began. She gave a brief nod, avoiding eye contact. "Bree called to say everything was delivered." "I liked the flowers." His voice was so awkward, low, and halting. He knew what he wanted to say. Why was he having such a hard time getting it out? "And I love your shirts." She flushed a deeper pink. "Laura." He stepped closer, resting one hand on each side of her on the work table, creating their own little cocoon. Her eyes lifted, and whether or not he imagined the swirls of longing reflected in them, a heated tension built all the same. He trailed a finger over one of her braids. "My confession is that I love your pigtails. Did you know that?" "You did mention them as a bonus for a girl you'd like to date." She reached up to play with a button on his shirt. "Zack, why didn't you kiss me last night?" He swished the end of her braid between his fingers, then across her collarbone, making little goosebumps appear along her skin. "The problem is that I don't just want one kiss. I want a forever of kisses." The way his admission caused her to draw in a quick breath urged him to continue. Dipping his head slightly, he said, "But I don't know if that's what you want." She leaned lightly into him, flattening her palms against his chest. "Our friendship means so much to me. I don't want to lose it, but I also don't want to stay just friends." Just a whisper of air separated them. He could feel the warmth of her body like a soft blanket, and all he wanted to do was pull her even closer. His heart skidded, then hammered in his ears. "Would you like to be my girlfriend?" He needed to hear her say the words. Anything that indicated she wanted to be his. "I'd like that very much," she said, her hands gliding up his chest to rest on his shoulders. "And you'd be my boyfriend, so I'd have exclusive rights to all your kisses, right?" He gently tilted up her chin with 2 fingers. He could feel her heartbeat thumping against his, a familiar cadence, pulsating with hope and promise. He leaned down and brushed his mouth across hers. The kiss was barely there and left him wanting so much more. His arms circled her, one hand nestled at the small of her back, the other cupping her face. "Every single one," he promised. His lips continued to brush against hers as he spoke, caressing her mouth more than kissing it. He raised his head, gazing into blue eyes swirling with desire. For him. Laura curled her fingers into his shirt, then dragged his mouth back to hers. Their lips moved together with reckless abandon. The fierce heat of their embrace was like a drug, each touch like sparks shooting out of a bonfire ready to ignite an entire forest. She wrapped her arms around his neck, locking herself into his embrace. Her soft moan filled him with a rush of emotions he couldn't define with just one word. Desire? Jubilation? completeness, peace. Holding Laura was like finding his perfect tuning pitch. Chapter 11. Laura tried to focus on the women in business meeting, but her mind kept drifting from the lady at the podium to Zack and the kiss. Her skin still broke out in goosebumps as she thought about being wrapped in his arms while his lips did magical things to hers, the way she'd lost control and practically climbed him like a tree, how he had boosted her up onto the work table, the way she'd wrapped her legs around his waist. Only a customer insistently knocking on the front door broke them apart. To be fair, the customer did have an appointment to pick up an arrangement at a specific time, but Laura couldn't help imagining what could have happened had they not been interrupted. She dropped her chin into her hands and sighed dreamily. Rachel leaned over and whispered, "I take it you and Zack figured things out?" Laura straightened, warmth suffusing her cheeks from being caught daydreaming during a business meeting. Yeah." Rachel's smile was infectious and comforting. "I'm so glad." At the podium, the woman leading the meeting announced, "We'll next be hearing from Miss Marjorie, who will introduce promotion opportunities for this month's Women in Business meeting, and then we will adjourn." The group applauded as a petite, white-haired lady took her spot at the microphone. "Miss Marjorie is the best," Rachel whispered. "I don't know if you remember her, but a little FYI, don't think she's a pushover just because she's tiny. She's a feisty one." "Good to know." She did remember Miss Marjorie a bit. Her house had been on the way to Crystal Creek Park, so most of the memories were either riding bikes past her house or a quick chat during family walks. She didn't remember her being feisty so much as a neighborhood grandma. "All right, ladies, it's April. You know what that means," Miss Marjorie announced. "We have just 6 weeks to finish planning and executing the Crystal Creek Reunion Festival." "I totally forgot Crystal Creek did this," Laura said. When she'd moved to Kansas City, she'd cut herself off from anything hometown related, other than dropping by to visit her family. Rachel shrugged. "Yeah, I don't think I went to any of it my senior year." "Me neither." She'd gone to prom, of course, but it had been such a disaster she'd bailed on all the plans for the Saturday festival. Instead, she'd spent the day in bed, crying. At least until Bree showed up with a bunch of superhero movies, and they had a movie marathon that lasted until early Sunday morning. Normally, remembering that time was like reinserting a knife into her heart. While it still hurt, it wasn't nearly the anguish it used to be. Perhaps her newfound time with Zack really was healing the past. Miss Marjorie's details about the weekend continued. "The committee has been meeting for months and has all the big details taken care of. The event will kick off with high school promenade on Friday night. The festival parade will be on Saturday morning, followed by the barbecue competition that runs until 2 p.m. The kiddie carnival will be set up all day at Crystal Creek Park. Saturday night will be the high school reunion dance, and then everything wraps up with fireworks at midnight. What we're looking for right now are sponsors for the raffle baskets, as well as some volunteers to help during the weekend. This is a great way to promote your businesses and services, ladies. All the donors will be included on our banners, flyers, and on social media pages. If you're interested in participating, please meet me at my table up front." The meeting ended, and everyone began to leave their seats or huddle into groups. The room's volume increased with all the growing conversations. Laura stood, shifting her weight from one side to the other to work out any kinks from sitting. "Well, sponsoring a basket is a no-brainer," Rachel said. "For you," said Charlie, joining them. "Everyone wants a basket of chocolate. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out how to make an appealing basket around a gift certificate toward renovation services." "Throw in a hammer," Victoria teased. "No, I run into this every year. A giant picture of me paired with real estate services looks gaudy next to all the cute baskets." Charlie winked. "Bet you get a lot of calls from single guys afterward, though." "Sweetie, if I was looking for a free meal, my flirting skills would take care of that." Laura laughed. The friendship around her felt like a warm hug, and it inspired an idea. She leaned forward, bracing her hands on the back of her chair. "What if we combine?" she suggested. "Something tangible paired with a service. For example, Rachel could put together a dessert to display with Victoria's real estate certificate, and I could create a flower arrangement that can be paired with Charlie's renovations." Rachel clapped her hands. "I love that idea." As they planned out their baskets, some other members heard about their combinations and ran with the idea. Many of them paired up with others to create fun baskets with themes, date night, game night, chocolate cravings baskets, and more. When Laura and Charlie gave their basket details to Miss Marjorie, she said, "It looks like you're going to be a great addition to our group. I hope you'll join some community committees, too. We need new ideas in this town." Laura thanked her. "Once I get through my shop's grand reopening, I'd love to find out more about volunteering." "You can be sure I'll track you down and hold you to it. Also, someone from the festival committee will be stopping in later today to talk about a flower order for decorations." Miss Marjorie shot her a wink before moving on to the next group ready to put in their basket details. Before leaving, Laura sought out Victoria at the volunteer table. "Did you hear that Mr. Weaver sold my building?" Victoria's head snapped up from where she was adding her name to a volunteer sign-up sheet. Her eyebrows scrunched together as she straightened to face Laura. "Interesting. He didn't have it listed. Do you know who the new owner is?" She slowly shook her head, her shoulders drooping. "I was hoping you might know that information. The only thing the other shop owners know is that he emailed us saying the building was sold, and the new owner would be contacting us soon." "That's very odd. Someone must have approached him directly with an offer." "Should I be worried?" Laura asked, twirling the end of her t-shirt around her finger. Victoria placed a reassuring hand on Laura's arm. "Your lease rolls over to the new owner, so you're safe there. My best advice is to not stress about it. Keep moving forward with business as usual. Usually these transactions are simply the change of a landlord's name and that's all. On the bright side, perhaps he will allow you to make those workroom changes you wanted." Laura brightened. "That's true. I hadn't thought of that." "No problem. Keep me updated. Oh, and don't forget to sign up to volunteer," Victoria said before saying goodbye. Laura perused the volunteer sign-up sheets. There were all sorts of carnival booth sign-ups: face painting, skee ball, ring toss, pick-a-duck, and more. She signed up to volunteer at the duck booth. It had always been her favorite as a kid. Each person chose a rubber ducky floating in the stream running around the counter of the booth. The number on the bottom of the duck indicated which section of prizes the winner got to choose from. Everyone left happy. She perused through the rest of the booths and stopped cold at one name. Zack had signed up for a 2-hour time slot at the dunking booth. Laura quickly jotted down that time frame and made a mental note to practice in advance. Just the thought of Zack with a wet shirt molded to his torso sent shivers through her. Perhaps the Crystal Creek Reunion Festival would be even more fun than she anticipated. She was sweeping the workroom when Zack arrived at Oopsie Daisy just 30 minutes before closing. She loved the way he pulled her in close, then nuzzled into her shoulder, placing a gentle kiss at the curve of her neck. "I missed you," he said, kissing a path up her throat between words. Sparklers lit up her body as his lips did incredible, spine-shivery things along her jawline. A delightful moan vibrated through her. A brief thought that his lips should have a degree from Hogwarts for their magical abilities flitted through her mind. She sank her hands into his thick brown hair, then tugged him into a real kiss, reveling in the waves of happiness and warmth rolling through her. When they finally broke apart, she said, "I missed you too." His arms stayed circled around her, holding her close as she snuggled against his broad chest. It was amazing how much things could change in just 24 hours. Well, really the change had come little by little over a few weeks of letters. She smiled. "You're a pretty smart guy." "Of course I am," he replied, making her laugh and give him a little slap on his back. "Should I ask what in particular has earned your praise?" "I was just thinking how the mailbox and letters led us to this moment." "That was one of my more brilliant ideas." His hand glided from her hips to her shoulders, then back again, making her feel like clay, happily molding to his touch. "Before we get too distracted, we should go over the festival order." She lifted her head to peer at him in surprise. "Are you on that committee?" "I am. It started out with some simple PR stuff, but somehow I turned into Miss Marjorie's slave." "I heard she's feisty." "That's putting it mildly. She knows how to work any situation to her advantage, which is why I'm here now, repping the decor committee to put in a flower order." "Let me grab my catalog and order forms." Laura pulled away, immediately missing the warmth and comfort of his embrace. "Pull it together, girl. You're still an independent woman." Of course, being an independent woman didn't mean she couldn't have a partner in crime. She sneaked a peek at Zack where he leaned casually against the workstation as he set up his laptop. His arresting good looks totally captured her body's attention, yet it was his heart that truly held her captive. Of course, it had held her captive once before. She clenched the catalog and ordering pad, nodding up inside. What if she was moving too fast? What if everything went wrong all over again? She took a deep breath, slowly letting it out. Only time would tell. Until he proved otherwise, she needed to trust in him. In them. With that thought buoying her up, she joined him at the table to go through the decor committee's needs. Zack pulled up photos of what the committee wanted to do. Her eyes widened at the flower-covered gazebo. The sprays were gorgeous, cascading flowers mixed with tulle and twinkle lights. But oh, so much work. Before you freak out, the decor committee is made up of a bunch of people who are totally into design. They know exactly how to put all this together. They just need the flowers and supplies ordered through you. She couldn't help a sigh of relief. I am so glad. I was just trying to figure out how I was going to get all this done, as well as all the prom corsages and boutonnieres. Also, I seriously want the names of the people on that committee. If they can pull this off, they need to be on my call list for venue decor. As they finished up the pictures, Zack's phone rang. Do you mind if I grab this? She waved him off. Could you also flip the door sign to closed while I work on this order? He moved to the front counter to take the call, which was apparently business-related. She tried to concentrate on her own tasks, but when she heard the name Abramson, she couldn't help but try to catch snippets of conversation. How odd that after all these years, Laura Abramson would come back into the picture. Was it an omen? She shivered at the thought. When she heard her name accompanied by Zack's bristled tone, she gave up the illusion of work and walked over to the archway separating the workroom from the front counter. Zack turned to face her, and her stomach nodded at his grim expression. She braced herself against what was coming, because it was surely something bad, something she absolutely did not want to hear. So, what you're saying is you bought the building from Mr. Weaver? Zack said into the phone, his fierce hazel eyes not leaving hers. And you're clearing out all the established businesses to renovate for your restaurant. Chapter 12. Laura swayed on her feet under a wave of lightheadedness. How could this be possible? She'd just moved in. Zack pressed his forefinger against his lips, signaling for her to stay quiet. Then he set his phone on the counter. Mr. Abramson, I'm switching the call to speakerphone so I can take notes. Tell me more about your plans. So it was Laura's father on the phone, not the former cheerleader herself. Zack grabbed a notepad and pen from the ordering counter, quickly scribbled, then turned it for her to see. Stay quiet, no matter what he says, okay? She nodded. He proceeded to take notes as Mr. Abramson talked through his plans. As I already said, we're going to give the current leasees bonus incentives to vacate their spaces early. Hopefully we can have them all out in 6 to 12 months. You keep saying we. Who all is part of this venture? Just so I can know who I'm working with? Of course, my daughter Laura and I are going in on it. Did I tell you she graduated from restaurant management and she's been running a place in Chicago? She's ready to come back home, open up her own place. It was like deja vu. Of course Laura Abramson was involved. She twisted the edge of her t-shirt around and around her finger, trying to process all the information coming at her. Zack covered her hand with his own, loosening the twisted mess, then twining his fingers through hers. His thumb rubbed soothing circles on the back of her hand. That's exciting. Congrats to you both, Zack said, continuing the conversation. And what work are you looking for me to provide? We need a complete branding package, including all the signage, menus, monograms, business cards, and more. Holy guacamole. That was the whole enchilada with all the extra fixings of PR orders. Zack paused. His voice was measured as he said, I would be happy to help with all that, but first I should let you know that my girlfriend owns the flower shop in one of the spaces you're vacating. I can't in good conscience accept you as a client until I know the situation between you and her is cleared up satisfactorily. Her heart stumbled. Was he seriously risking such a huge opportunity for her? She shook her head, frantically, from side to side, but he just kissed the back of her hand. He scribbled on the notepad, You're worth it. Mr. Abramson sputtered on the other end of the line. But you're the best. Yes, I am. which is why I'm sure you'll quickly work this all out. If not, I'd be happy to send you referrals for other PR companies in the area." Laura's jaw dropped in disbelief as he wrapped up the phone call. Her brain felt like scrambled eggs. Zack turned his full attention to her, and she tried to figure out what to say, what words to string together, but was at a loss. He closed the gap between them, rubbing his hands up and down her arms. "Are you okay?" Did that really just happen?" "Everything's going to work out. You're smart and capable. If you want, I can help you figure out how to use all this to the shop's advantage, or I can be on standby while you work through it. I'm a problem fixer, so it would be tough, but I'd do it. Just let me know what you need from me." She nodded, still trying to process the past 10 minutes. How could everything change so drastically in such a tiny space of time? Ironically, wasn't she thinking the same thing about their relationship a little bit ago? Speaking of Zack, she whacked him on the chest. "What were you thinking turning down a job like that?" His lips curved into a soft smile. "Laura, there's no universe that I'd ever choose a job, money, or anything else over you." Well, drat. That just made her heart melt in all sorts of gooey ways. The shop phone rang. He leaned back and craned his neck to see the caller ID. "Looks like Mr. Abramson is anxious to talk. Do you want to ignore it for tonight, or are you up for a conversation with him?" She didn't even need to answer that question. She picked up the shop phone. "Thanks for calling Oopsie Daisy. This is Laura. How can I help you?" "Hey, Laura. This is Frank Abramson. I'm not sure if you've heard from Eddie Weaver yet, but I purchased the building where your shop is located. I'm hoping you have time to talk through some details." She took a deep breath. After years of working with bridezillas, she had learned it was best to keep cool and professional. Letting her emotions rule the situation would only lead to the inability to communicate and compromise. "Sure. I know the other shop owners have a lot of questions too. Would you like to chat now or make an appointment?" "If now works for you, that'd be great." She motioned for Zack to lean in so he could hear the conversation as well. "I just closed up the shop for the night, so now is fine," she replied, deciding to continue the conversation as if she knew nothing about what had been discussed between him and Zack. "I'm glad you reached out. I don't know Mr. Weaver very well, other than going through the lease with him 2 months ago when I purchased Crystal Creek Floral. We just finished shop renovations and are planning the grand reopening. I'll be sure to send you an invite. Oh, and I'd love to talk about updates for the back end of the shop, too." "Renovations?" Mr. Abramson asked, sounding a bit choked. Apparently, Mr. Weaver didn't communicate much with him either. Another thing she learned from working with bridezillas was to be lavish with the details. They were all professionally done by Charlie Jackson. I made sure not to scrimp on any of the expenses, especially since the shop has been here for 40 years and probably will be here for another 40. "Oh, maybe we should meet in person after all. But first, I should let you know that I won't be renewing your lease. I'm planning to remodel the building for a new restaurant my daughter is going to run. You went to school with Laura, right?" "Yes, I vaguely remember her," she said, gripping the phone tighter. "Back to my lease, though. I still have 3 more years under contract, and I just invested a ton of money into the renovations." "I'm prepared to make a generous offer for you to vacate earlier, possibly in 6 months." Zack scribbled on the notepad. Remember, he has to honor all current leases. "That's impossible. I can't find a space and relocate that quickly. And really, as a new business owner, my finances just don't go that far. I don't think I can make a move before the end of this 3-year lease, at the earliest." "I understand being a new business owner and all that comes with it. How about you send me an expense report for the renovations? I'll put together a proposal to cover some of the renovations and moving costs." "Will you also be returning the lease's down payment so I can apply it to the new space's lease?" "I'll consider it," Mr. Abramson said hesitantly. "Okay, then I'll check in with my real estate agent to see if there are any properties I'm interested in. Also, I think it would be best to handle the lease negotiations through my lawyer. I'll have him reach out to you." A choked cough came through the line. Then, an agreement. She disconnected the call. "The lawyer thing was brilliant," Zack said, an appreciative gleam in his eyes. She just shrugged. "I may have majored in horticulture and floral design, but I took a ton of business classes as well. Thanks for the note about the lease requirements. Victoria had mentioned it, but the reminder kicked my brain into business law mode. She took a deep breath, then let it out on a sigh. Her shoulders slumped as she scrubbed her hands over her face. What was she going to do? Obviously relocate, but should she hold off on the grand reopening and all the promotion she'd been gearing up for? It seemed pointless now. He gently squeezed her upper arms. What are you thinking? Honestly, my brain feels like it's on one of those teacup rides, all spinny and a chaotic mess. She blinked rapidly against her stinging eyes, but lost the fight as a few tears escaped. She dashed them away with her hand. Zack cupped her face, his thumb grazing her wet cheek. It's okay to cry, you know. It doesn't make you weak. It just means you're human and dealing with a crazy situation. He dropped a light kiss on her lips. How can I help? Do you want to dive into all of it tonight, or do you need some time to process? Do you want company or time alone? I don't want to be alone. She knew instinctively that she wanted to be with him. If she went home, she'd drive herself crazy with all the what-ifs and end up crying herself to sleep. I need to distract my brain tonight. Tomorrow, I'll break out all the sticky notes and pens and start making phone calls. But fair warning, I'll probably cry on and off. Tears won't make me melt like that witch from Oz. How about a movie? You could ride home with me? We'll grab takeout? Everything about his plan sounded perfect. Zack was perfect, at least for her. This man had stood up for her without taking over. Instead, he stayed by her side, confident in her abilities to handle the situation and ready to offer support if she needed it. On impulse, she grabbed his shirt and pulled him down to her level. Her eyes connected with his startled hazel ones. She did need him. Not to solve her problems, but to have him by her side, to give her strength. She didn't want to just tell him how much she appreciated him. She wanted to show him. Laura leaned forward to nip at his bottom lip, then used the tip of her tongue to soothe it before fusing her lips to his. Cascades of delight filled her as his hands skimmed down her sides, coming to rest on her lower back, pulling her in until her softness melted into him. She wasn't sure how to handle the liquid fire running through her veins. It was more than anything she'd ever felt, and that was terrifying in its own right. Her hands ran up his hard chest, over broad shoulders strong enough to share her burdens, and finally sank into his hair. She trailed little kisses along his jawline, then settled her head against his shoulder. She closed her eyes, inhaling spicy cologne and Zack. Her chest rose and fell with his as they held each other, waiting for their heartbeats to even out. More and more layers were being added to their relationship. It felt like a big piece of her heart was passing from her to him. When she spoke again, it was to ask one simple question. How do you feel about pad thai? Chapter 13. It was well past midnight when the credits for The Prisoner of Azkaban rolled. Zack clicked the TV off, casting the room into darkness save for the dim nightlight in the corner. He smiled at the occasional soft snores coming from where Laura was sound asleep. When they decided to do a Harry Potter marathon, Laura had gone home to change. Zack had taken the opportunity to also change into sweatpants and a t-shirt, then set up TV trays and plates for their pad thai. When Laura returned in lounge pants and an "I had my patience tested, it was negative" t-shirt with her pillow and favorite snuggly blanket in tow, he'd almost laughed. But seeing her hair free from braids falling over her shoulders in waves left him momentarily speechless. Thankfully, he regained his faculties so they could get the marathon started. Between movies 1 and 2, they cleaned up dinner, then set up the pull-out couch. He loved it when she grabbed his arm, wrapped it around her shoulders, then snuggled into his side. There were a few times when she silently cried. The first time he'd paused the movie thinking she might want to talk. Instead, she'd whacked his shoulder and told him to keep the movie going. So he'd simply pulled her in closer and offered the tissue box. Zack eased off the pull-out bed, careful not to wake her. He gently tucked his blanket around her curled-up form. Unable to resist the temptation, he ran his fingers over her curls. The silky soft hair bounced as he twisted a curl around his finger, then released it. Even asleep, her beauty captured him. He took a moment to let his eyes linger over her features. Long, dark eyelashes rested on creamy skin. Faint freckles dotted her cheekbones. He took in the curve of her jaw and an errant curl that fell across her cheek, just to the side of her slightly parted pink lips. Remembering the kisses they shared filled him with longing to gather her into his arms again. While he pushed those feelings to the side, he couldn't hinder how his heart swelled with love. He crouched down, brushed the curl from her cheek, then placed a tender kiss at her hairline. I love you, he whispered, wishing she was awake so he could confess his feelings. She shifted in her sleep, pulling her pillow closer. Love you too, she mumbled. Zack sat back on his haunches, stunned. Did she even know she was responding to him? For all he knew, she could be dreaming about her parents, a celebrity crush, or heck, even her childhood cat. But man, he really, really hoped she was talking about him. Torn, he quietly made his way to his room. Before rounding the corner into the bedroom hallway, he looked back at Laura's sleeping form. Being with her was like Christmas mornings and hitting the jackpot all rolled into one. It didn't matter if they were laughing or if she was crying buckets of tears and tossing used tissues all over his living room floor. Being with her was the best thing ever. In that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He was going to marry that girl. You can cook. Startled, Zack fumbled the pancake mid-flip. He barely saved it so half didn't end up off the edge of the griddle. He looked over to where Laura hovered just inside the kitchen entry. Her curly blonde hair stuck out every which way as she tried to smooth it into submission before giving up. Everything about it was absolutely charming. His pulse kicked up several notches. Did she remember his confession? More importantly, did she remember her response? He cleared his throat, hoping to appear calm and collected. I can. Have we not covered that in our confessions yet? That's a serious oversight on my part. Do you cook? He quirked an eyebrow from where he stood at the range, manning the blueberry pancakes. Do cereal and ramen count? She asked, twisting the bottom of her t-shirt around her finger. His expression gave his answer. She lifted one shoulder in a partial shrug. There are a few other things in my cooking repertoire, but it's not something I love to do. More of a necessity to stay alive. He moved the finished pancakes to a serving plate and turned off the range. Yet another reason why you need me in your life, he said, crossing the room to drop a quick kiss on her cheek. She was still warm and had little wrinkle lines on her face from her pillow. Are you hungry? She nodded as her stomach rumbled. So he took her hand in his and accompanied her to the table he had already set with plates, utensils, and glasses. He pulled out her chair. It's not sticky notes and fun pens, but I was able to dig out a notebook and some different colored ballpoint pens, in case you want to jot down any thoughts you woke up with. Her cheeks flushed. Thank you. That was so thoughtful. Once she was seated and taking down notes, he dashed to the fridge for orange juice and milk, then grabbed the plate of pancakes from the counter. I can help, Laura said, setting the pen down and moving to rise from the chair. I've got it. I was a server at a restaurant all through college. Believe me, these couple of items are nothing compared to balancing those giant trays with dinners for 5 people. He quickly set everything out on the table, then took his seat. I hope you like blueberry pancakes. Her stomach gave an audible rumble. Her face lit up as she laughed and rubbed her hand across her midsection. They're my favorite. As they dished up their breakfasts, Zack thought about how this could be them every Saturday morning. Her messy hair, him cooking breakfast, sharing conversation. Eventually add in a munchkin or two. Together they could turn this house into a home. Life wouldn't just be about to-do lists and clients. It would be about creating happy memories for their family to cherish for generations. He reined in his feelings, at least enough that he wouldn't end up dropping to his knee beside her chair. This was going to take a lot more consideration and planning. Plus, he needed to be sure she was on the same page. So, what's the last thing you remember from the movie marathon? He asked, needing to talk while trying to figure out how to work his feelings into their conversation. I remember the Quidditch game and the Whomping Willow going after Harry and his broom. I think I woke up for bits here and there, though. I definitely remember you mumbling that rats were horrible pets. Then something about how Hermione doesn't deserve Ron. Her eyes widened. It's true. I always felt like Ron just needed to meet me and then he'd forget all that Hermione nonsense. A laugh rumbled through him. Ron, eh? Not Harry or Draco? Some girls are really into the bad boy vibe. Oh, no, she said, her hair falling forward as she shook her head from side to side. I'm all about the geeky funny guys. Score point in his favor. Of the Harry Potter cast, or really any show cast, he was the geeky sidekick. Ron is definitely the comedic relief. My favorite Ron line of all time is, "Why spiders?
Why couldn't it be follow the butterflies?
Laura pointed at him. Yes! And when they escape from Fluffy and Hermione is all, I'm going to bed before you two get me killed or even worse expelled, she said in a high-pitched voice, mimicking the character. Then Ron says to Harry, she needs to sort out her priorities, they said together. Of the trio, I always thought Hermione was the best. She's so smart, analyzes everything, and is totally the kick-butt character, Zack said, then stuffed a fork full of pancake into his mouth. She tilted her head. I'm surprised you're not Team Harry. He just shrugged. He drives the conflict, but he'd be nothing without Hermione and Ron. I totally agree. So, what's your plan of attack for today? He asked, motioning to the notebook. I started a to-do list of people to call, things to look into. I'm going to start with Victoria. She'll know a lot about what's available real estate-wise and might have some insight on how to handle the situation too. She paused, looking to the side. I know that look, Zack observed. What are you thinking about? She rolled her lips together as if considering whether to share her thoughts or not. Well, Victoria mentioned something to me a few weeks ago, and I'm wondering if it's a viable option. Intriguing. He leaned forward. Tell me more. She asked me not to share the info because it was in the process of being approved with the city council and hasn't been announced yet. But, basically, the project would allow me to get into a shop space that's built out to my specifications. So the workspace would be designed to be efficient and useful rather than the frustrating setup you have now? Exactly. There will always be pros and cons to any space I rent, but this new spot might give me the ability to really set things up the way I want. Sounds like a win to me. What's holding you back? The timeline. I don't know when it will be open to the public. It could be a year or even 2. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. I say, don't compromise on a space. If you have to move, make sure it's a location you love, where you picture building your business over the next decade or more. Mr. Abramson can't force you out of your lease. He'll just have to adjust his plans to what works for you and the other business owners in the building. Her blue eyes brightened as she squeezed his hand. You're right. I'm going to shoot Victoria a text now. Hopefully she'll have time to meet today or tomorrow. He released her hand. You go do that while I clean up. Oh, no, I can help. She started stacking utensils on her plate, but he came around and took them from her. Seriously, go take care of your stuff. It's more important right now. I can handle this. She nodded, then tore off the page with her notes, folded it, and put it in the pocket of her lounge pants. When she stood, she wrapped her arms around his waist, burrowing into the hug. The press of her body against his sent all sorts of happy zings bouncing through him like a pinball machine, but he simply wrapped his arms around her and held on to the moment. He smiled when she propped her chin on his chest, blue eyes peeking up at him through long lashes. I'll text you when I hear back from her, okay? Keep me updated. You can message me anytime. For the moment, he left the plates in favor of walking with her into the living room. She gathered her pillow and blanket, then shoved her feet into her sneakers. At the door, he dropped a light kiss on her lips. He watched to make sure she made it inside her house safely. Each step she took away from him made him anxious for when they'd be together again. But while she had a project to work on, he had one too. A real confession. Chapter 14. Victoria slid a folder across the table to Laura. Here are the Indulgence Row application papers and a few pages with details about the project. We're still in the process of putting together official documents. Once we have details settled, we'll announce the project and officially begin taking applications. So you're our first business owner to apply. Laura placed her hand on top of the folder, hesitating before opening it. I have to be honest, part of me is super excited to put together a dream shop, but another part is still crazy overwhelmed by this entire situation. That's normal. Quite frankly, the idea of selling the building without giving notice to the lessees goes against all business etiquette. Speaking of which, I also printed out your lease agreement and added notes for you to use to negotiate with Mr. Abramson. It's all in the folder. Thank you so much. Laura opened the folder, finding the documents her realtor had mentioned. By the way, who's the investor for Indulgence Row? I can't divulge that information. The investor prefers to remain anonymous. The only thing I'm allowed to say is that he is invested in making the community better. I'll manage the project, so I'll always be your point of contact. Laura chewed on her bottom lip. It was all too easy to picture the shadowy, unknown building owner as another Mr. Weaver, ready to sell her dream shop away from her as soon as she got it. She wondered if she should demand to know the investor's identity. I highlighted a few things on the Indulgence Row contract that I thought might ease your worries. Terms for rentals, renovations, terminating the contract on your end versus the investor's end. You'll find that we're very transparent and open with communication. Other than the investor's identity? Yes, with that exception. Why don't you look over these documents and let me know if you have any questions? Laura nodded, then pulled out the paperwork. She asked a few questions about the highlighted areas, but overall, the plans and contracts were solid. There was only one confusing element. The leasing costs rose over time. When she commented on the lease changes, Victoria was quick to reassure her. Like I said before, the investor is very committed to making this section of Crystal Creek better for the community. He feels it's not just about investing in property, but also in the business owners who are selected. Laura listened intently as Victoria explained more about the unusual terms of the contract. The investor is aware of your situation and asked for the contract to be tweaked to help you, as a new business owner, be able to make this transition to the new location with as little financial burden as possible. We couldn't take out all the expenses, of course, but we did reduce them drastically. You'll notice that the first year's lease is reduced by 50% of the normal lease amount. The second year will move to a 20% discount, with the third year being the first full-priced rent year. The investor hopes this will help you recover from basically setting up 2 new businesses in 1 year. That's quite generous, Laura said, astonished by the reasoning behind the contract terms. He is asking that you commit to the location for at least 7 years, although ideally he'd love to see your shop stay permanently. Laura glanced through the papers, but her eyes didn't take in the words. Instead, she focused inwardly to evaluate how she felt. There were no knots in her stomach. In fact, she felt the first touch of giddiness beginning to race through her veins. Not only would the shop be built to suit her workflow and style, she could make the move without dreading the numbers in her bank account balance. It would still be tight, but not possibly going bankrupt tight. She could do this. She gave Victoria the first genuine happy smile of their meeting. "I'm in," she said, extending her hand across the table. Victoria practically radiated sunshine as she accepted the handshake. "I really believe you're going to love your new shop. Welcome to Indulgence Row." Back in her car, Laura shot a quick text to Zack. L. Just finished meeting with Victoria. I can't wait to tell you the details, but it's a go. It was less than 15 seconds when his reply appeared. Z. Congrats. Can I take you out to dinner tonight to celebrate? Her thumbs flew across the screen. L. Yes, I'd love that. The shop closes at 6:30, so I won't be home until about 7ish. Is that too late? Z. Not at all. I'll be home. Just text me when you're ready and I'll come pick you up. L. Perfect. See you then. As she started her car, another text came through. Z. BTW. You've got mail. Her heart leapt in her chest as she wondered what confession the newest note contained. She was so tempted to drive home, but she had closed the shop for an extended lunch break to meet with Victoria, and it was already after 1 o'clock. Her responsible side won out, and she headed back to Oopsie Daisy. Nevertheless, every mile she put between herself and the mailbox was excruciating. Hopefully, the next 5 hours would pass quickly. Returning to the shop ended up being the right choice. She had several customers come in for bouquets, met with someone browsing for a wedding, and talked with her lawyer about the situation with Mr. Abramson. She was excited about the Indulgence Row opportunity. If her lawyer could negotiate a good deal, she just might be able to financially swing the relocation. Plus, the new shop would be amazing. By the time she closed and locked up for the night, Laura was quite pleased with her progress for the day. Now, all she wanted was to dash home and open the mailbox. In her excitement to get home, she had a bit of a lead foot and ended up getting pulled over. The swirl of red lights from behind where she pulled over to the side of the road illuminated her car as she handed over her license and registration to Officer Tyler Jackson. Laura Anderson, the tall officer noted, glancing from her paperwork to where she sat in the car. Aren't you my sister Charlie's friend who just moved back to Crystal Creek? She tried to gulp past the lump lodged in her throat. She'd only been pulled over one other time, and it had been to let her know one of her headlights was burned out. Yes, she managed. That's me. I'm just on my way home from the flower shop. Her nervous smile probably made her look like a drunken idiot. Or maybe not, because Officer Jackson smiled back as he returned her license and registration. Since you're still settling in, I'll give you a pass just this once, but slow down, okay? She nodded eagerly. Absolutely. No problem. Thank you. She clamped her mouth shut before she continued to ramble, and he changed his mind about her sanity or sobriety. With a touch to the brim of his cap, he nodded, then returned to his car. Releasing a tense breath, Laura signaled before pulling back onto the road, careful to keep at least 2 miles below the posted speed limit. Once she was safely parked in her garage, she made her way to the sliding glass doors off the back of the house. She unlocked the doors and slid them open, letting in the warm, fragrant breeze. As she moved through the backyard, she noticed the trees were budding. It would soon be green everywhere. She liked to joke that Crystal Creek was where Mother Nature came to live during menopause. The switches between 70-degree weather one day, then 15 degrees and snow the next, were enough to keep Kansans in constant weather whiplash. Thankfully, spring had officially settled into its warmer weather. In another few weeks, she'd be digging up the backyard to create her own little flower garden oasis. Before opening the mailbox, she looked across the fence to Zack's house. Lights glowed from the front of the house, but the side facing her was dark. She quickly opened the mailbox, pulled out the folded note, then made her way back inside before he spied her. Then again, she wondered if he felt as antsy as she did when notes were going back and forth, waiting to be read or responded to. She unfolded the paper to reveal his neatly printed lines. To the girl next door. Ron is lovable and unexpectedly clever. Hermione is wise and unexpectedly witty. Together, they make the best of combinations. Would you be the Hermione to my Ron and be my date to the Crystal Creek reunion prom? P.S. I promise to wear something nicer than Ron's dress robes. Yours always, the guy next door. Her heart pounded faster than it had while getting pulled over. She clutched the note to her chest. Her very own for-real, meant-for-her, not Laura Abramson prom invite. For one teensy-tiny second, she questioned whether she wanted to experience a prom do-over, but picturing Zack in a sexy black tux told her the answer. Yes, yes, and a million more yeses. Ding-dong. She checked her watch, realizing she needed to rush to prepare for dinner. She debated whether to answer the door or not. She peeked through the sidelight window next to the door and spied Zack rocking back and forth on his heels, his hands hidden behind his back. She grabbed the door handle, trying to restrain herself from yanking it open and jumping into his arms while shouting, "Yes!" While she did her best not to whip the door open, she couldn't rein in her giant smile. He smiled in return. I saw the red flag was down. I thought I'd take a chance and come over early. He pulled his hand from behind his back and presented her with a bouquet of paper flowers, some with tiny lines of print, some made with yellow or blue paper. It's our house colors, he explained. Those are incredible, she exclaimed, drawing her finger along the delicate paper petals. Where did you find them? Eden from the library makes them. She has an in with a used bookstore who sends her damaged books that can't be sold. She turns them into all sorts of art. I thought you might like a bouquet you can keep forever. Her heart filled to overflowing. The prom invitation, the bouquet, it was so her, so them. And honestly, that shouldn't surprise her at all. He was always thinking of her, taking her opinions and feelings into consideration in so many little ways, from a notebook and pens when she needed to take notes to a movie marathon safe haven when she needed to cry. And then something clicked, like the release of a lock that only she could feel, like his name settling into a hole in her heart, a perfect fit. She loved him. Not just high school band geek Zack, not just next-door neighbor Zack, both of them. Everything about him that led to this moment. Her, Zack. He took her hand in his, warm and steady. Laura, would you go to prom with me? Why did she feel like she was responding to so much more than a dance? Like, maybe a forever? She didn't hesitate. I'd love to. Chapter 15. You look like a movie star, Bree declared. Laura ran her fingers over the delicate burgundy lace and sequins dotting her gown's spaghetti-strapped bodice. She fingered the edge of where the lace met the rich satin A-line skirt. Do you think it's too much? Not at all. Bree moved behind her, joining Laura's reflection in the mirror. She shifted some curls to cascade over Laura's shoulder. Just make sure I'm around when you swish those hips and reveal the skirt's hidden slit. Zack's reaction will be priceless. Happiness bubbled up inside of Laura as her lips curved into a wide smile. Tonight was going to be magnificent. Bree shifted from side to side, showing off her own black dress. The gown hugged her figure to mid-thigh before flaring out in a high-low skirt. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into an elegant chignon style. "Do you think Graydon will like my dress?" she asked. "I still can't believe you're going to the dance together." Laura slipped into her burgundy satin shoes. Her friend just shrugged. "It's no big deal. We're friends." Laura slid a sideways glance her way. "Uh-huh." "For reals. He's not my type. But he is Zack's best friend, and I'm your best friend. Who better to go on a double date with? Besides, Graydon is splurging on a limo, and he booked the private dining room at Brisket and Noodles. We don't need to be all lovey-dovey to have a fun evening." Laura conceded the point. She rubbed her thumb into the palm of her hand. Even with hiring extra help for the prom rush, her hands ached from creating corsages galore, not to mention the arrangements for a wedding, some special order birthday bouquets, and a funeral. It had been a busy 3 days. She'd hardly seen Zack during that time. He'd popped in a few times to bring her a treat or just to say hello, but her days had been starting extra early and ending super late. She even ended up asking Bree to cover her volunteer shift at the kiddie carnival. The only other bright spot was the video Bree sent of Zack getting repeatedly dunked. Laura sucked in a quick breath when the doorbell rang. "Prince Charming has arrived," Bree said in a sing-song voice. Then, more seriously, "Let's not keep our dates waiting." Laura quickly put a few items into a clutch as Bree slipped out of the room, beating her to the door. She could hear all the exchanged greetings as she descended the stairs. Zack entered the foyer, and the way his tuxedo accentuated his broad chest sent her heart skidding to a stop. His eyes widened, sweeping over her from head to toe. Then he shouldered Graydon aside to meet her at the end of the staircase. Her breath caught as he lifted her hand and placed his lips to the back of it, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are stunning," he whispered, the words tickling across her skin. The kiss itself was feather-light, while heat darkened his gaze, making her want to melt right then and there. A forced cough broke the spell. "We'll just meet you at the limo," Graydon said, gesturing for Bree to precede him. Their voices faded as Zack threaded his fingers through Laura's, their gazes still intensely locked together. He edged in closer, leaning down to nuzzle just below her ear. "I want to kiss you, but I'm afraid I won't ever stop." "That would be nice," she said softly, licking her lips in anticipation of his lips meeting hers. "Honk honk." Another spell broken. He groaned. She felt him steel himself just before he stepped back. "We should probably go." "Probably," she agreed, half hoping the limo would just leave them behind. Together, they left the house and slid into the long, sleek limo through the open door. The buttery leather felt soft beneath her hands, but not nearly as good as it felt to be pressed up next to Zack. "No smeared lipstick," Bree observed, then held her hand out to Graydon. "I told you they needed a few more minutes." "I thought you had faster moves than that," Graydon grumbled, dropping a $5 bill into her hand. Bree tutted. "It's all about the slow burn. The anticipation is what sells a kiss." A deep flush spread across Zack's cheeks, and Laura was sure hers were just as red, especially when Graydon and Bree laughed. Laura found herself thinking Graydon and Bree might be a dangerous combination. But in reality, the evening turned out just fine. The two troublemakers continued to banter, but they eased up on the teasing. The first stop of the evening was dinner at Brisket and Noodles. Flickering candles gave the room an intimate, romantic feel. The food was delicious. A buffet of pulled pork mac and cheese, honey chipotle chicken, and barbecue beef burnt ends was laid out with a variety of sides for them to partake of. Then it was time for the dance. Zack tucked Laura's hand into the crook of his elbow as he escorted her into the reunion prom. Entering the school brought back a flood of memories from their senior prom. Old Laura would never in a million years have considered returning to Crystal Creek High for another dance, let alone prom. She looked up at Zack, grateful for the healing that had occurred over the past few months. The dance's theme was an enchanted evening, and the decor went above and beyond to showcase it. Twinkle lights and white balloons created a dreamy walkway into the gymnasium. Draped tulle gave the ceiling a soft, cloudy effect. Extra twinkle lights, balloons, and large silver and white stars hung down at various intervals, creating a dreamy night sky. Wow, the seniors this year really outdid themselves, Laura said, taking it all in. Tables around the room were half filled with people chatting, while the majority of the couples were out on the dance floor. There were so many familiar faces among the attendees. It was fun to recognize friends in town for the reunion, as well as members of the community of all ages. "Oh, look, there's Miss Marjorie," Bree said, pointing to one side of the dance floor. "Isn't that your brother she's dancing with, Laura?" BJ was indeed paired with Miss Marjorie, leading her in a country two-step. A fit of giggles overtook her. "I wonder how he got roped into that." "Oh, Miss Marjorie is an equal opportunity dance partner," Graydon said. "Last year, she came prepared with a list of men she planned to dance with. She called it her unsuspecting victim's dance card." Laura put a hand to her chest. "She didn't." "Oh yes, she did," Zack confirmed. "Well, goodness, I need to be more like Miss Marjorie," she said as the song ended and another queued up. Zack pulled her closer to his side. "I do believe your dance card is full." She laughed again. "I didn't mean dance partners, just how she lives her life. She's so bold and strong, you know?" Bree tapped her chin with her forefinger. "I think age and perspective makes her bold. That probably will be us in about, 30 or 40 more years." "Don't let Miss Marjorie hear you say that," Laura said, not wanting to hurt the elderly lady's feelings. "Hear what?" The group spun to find Miss Marjorie being escorted past them by Officer Tyler Jackson. She really did have quite the knack for finding partners. Laura smiled. "I was just saying I idolize you." Miss Marjorie's eyes fluttered and she let out a surprised, "Oh!" She cleared her throat, then patted Laura's cheek. "You are perfect exactly as you are, Laura Anderson, and don't you let anyone tell you different. Aside from a little speeding, that is." Tyler winked at her. While her friends chuckled, Laura flushed at the reminder of him pulling her over. Miss Marjorie playfully swatted his arm. "Now, I do believe there's a line dance coming up next. I expect to see you all out there with me and Tyler." The couple entered the dance floor, and sure enough, the opening beats for Cupid Shuffle vibrated the speakers. How does she always know these things? Zack shook his head. "I swear, sometimes I think she has psychic abilities." "Well, in this case," Bree said, "it's easy enough to figure out. The DJ is her grandnephew. I'd totally bet she had him arrange the playlist to her liking." She looped her arm through Graydon's. "Now let's go dance." And dance they did. It was hilarious watching Bree and Graydon riff off each other as they tried to funk up their shuffle moves. But the real treat was when Miss Marjorie and Tyler broke out into some epic footwork combinations. Laura hooted and hollered with the rest of the crowd as she kept time with the song. That song led to a big band song where Laura discovered Zack loved East Coast swing. She knew a bit, but with him leading, she felt like a pro. She loved the way his hand slid across her back as he led her through different move combinations. And inevitably, his hand found hers again at just the right moment. Enchanted Evening was right. The whole dance was magical. Zack swung her out on a twirl, and it was then he discovered the thigh-high slit in her skirt. She knew, because he stumbled and missed several dance beats, though the look on his face was oh so worth it. Bree must have caught it all too, because Laura could hear her laughter over the music. With their steps back in sync, he pulled her in close to say, "I think we need more twirls. Lots and lots of twirls." Laughter bubbled through her as he did just that, sent her into a series of twirls. When the song ended, her head was spinning and he sported a giant Cheshire Cat grin. After her head cleared, she quirked an eyebrow. "Like what you see?" His grin grew even broader. "Every single inch." Heavens, this man would have her laughing her entire life if she let him, and she was inclined to do just that. The playlist included songs from the 50s all the way through current popular dance tunes. They periodically took dance breaks to catch their breath and chat with friends. At the punch table, they even ran into Laura Abramson. At first, Laura didn't recognize her. Of course, the pink pixie haircut and intricate tattoo sleeves, accompanied by her very tattooed husband, could have been something to do with that. Their conversation was brief, but Laura, the former cheerleader, actually brought up the restaurant she was opening. "I understand your flower shop is in that building," she said. I know Daddy is anxious for everything to come together so he can get me back home as soon as possible, but honestly, I'm still under contract in Chicago for the next year. Laura slipped her arm around her husband. Daddy is just excited for us to return because he knows we're planning to start a family once we're settled in Crystal Creek. I think all his Papa Bear instincts are coming out, but don't let him bulldoze you into rushing. Thanks for the tips, and congratulations to you both, Laura said, for once feeling relaxed and confident as Zack leaned close to drop a kiss on the top of her head. The changes in her life and what she thought her future would be like had changed so much from just a few months ago to this moment, changes she never would have anticipated. But that filled her with hope. The last song of the evening was announced, Love by Nat King Cole. Laura spotted Miss Marjorie sitting at a table. I'm surprised Miss Marjorie hasn't snagged a dance partner, she said, as she and Zack moved onto the dance floor. He pulled her into his arms. She always sits this one out. It was her wedding song. Oh. Her heart ached for the sweet lady. How did you know? Last year, I asked her to dance with me. We talked instead, and she told me all about how she met her husband. He was a Navy test pilot who retired after a nasty crash. That's when they moved to Crystal Creek. I didn't know. I need to invite her to lunch and get to know her better. She'd enjoy that, he said, sending her into an elegant turn before bringing her close to him once more. He began to sing the lyrics softly in her ear, and Laura melted into him, goosebumps dotting her neck under his breath. She could have glided with him forever, safe in his arms. As the end of the song neared, he twirled her, then lowered her into a dip and sang the last words. Love was made for me and you. Zack, she breathed. He closed the distance between them, capturing her lips in a brief, sweet kiss. With his hand at her back, he righted them, holding her securely against him. So many feelings swirled through her. Big feelings. Big, bright, beautiful feelings. Feelings that felt like sunshine wanting to burst free. Are you ready for the fireworks? He asked. Yes. Yes, she was. Oh, he meant the actual city fireworks display. Disappointment welled up when she realized the rest of the evening would be spent with Graydon and Bree. Not that she had anything against spending time with them, but what she really longed for was some time alone with Zack. Sure, she finally responded to his question. He again tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow as they exited the gym, leading her through the crush of people leaving the dance. She looked around the entryway. Do you see Graydon and Bree? Oh, they left a little while ago to grab a spot to watch the fireworks at Crystal Creek Park. That was nice of them to go ahead and save us spots. Actually, I have other plans for us. Other plans? Her question echoed in the evening air, but he just smiled. They crossed the parking lot to his truck. I dropped this off before we picked you up this evening. He opened the door for her, then once she was settled, jogged around to the other side. Where are we going? It's a surprise, he said, reaching over to take her hand. He drove away from Crystal Creek Park, down some quiet neighborhood roads before coming out on Crystal Creek Parkway and crossing the bridge. Laura recognized the side road he took as the one leading to the river docks. I haven't been down here since high school, she said, remembering swimming and boating at Bree's family dock. It wasn't a popular spot to view the fireworks since they were set up to be viewed from the park, so there were only a few other cars nearby. Toward the end of the road, he stopped, then backed into a dock area. Give me a few minutes to get everything set up, okay? Sure, she replied, wondering what there could be to set up on the deserted dock. After he hopped out, she heard him lower the tailgate. The truck rocked as he jumped into the bed. There were some scraping noises and a vacuum? What in the world was he doing back there? When he finally opened her door, he'd removed his tuxedo jacket and his white shirt sleeves were rolled to just below his elbows. His bow was untied and draped around his collar, where the top few buttons of his shirt were undone, exposing the length of his tanned throat. She gulped. He had transformed from sexy geek guy to Mr. Super Sexy Geek Guy. I thought you might want to wear this, he said, holding out his jacket. It's breezier down here by the water. She cautiously exited the truck. Thank you, she said, threading her arms through the jacket. The sleeves hung past her hands. It was baggy across her slender shoulders, but she loved the lingering spicy scent that was all his. It felt like she was enveloped in Zack. It's a little rocky, so be careful in your heels. He looped an arm around her waist, and she snuggled into him. She cautiously made her way to the back of the truck. curious about what she might find. When she peeked over the side, she found that an air mattress filled the bed, complete with pillow rests, blankets, low-light battery lanterns, and a cooler with water bottles and snacks. "Were you a Boy Scout or something? You seem awfully prepared all the time." He chuckled. "Just parents who taught me to always think ahead. You can step on this cooler, then up into the truck." He gestured to the large blue cooler on the ground, offering his hand. Gathering her satin skirt into one hand and gripping his with the other, Laura stepped onto the cooler. She paused to take off her heels before taking the last step into the truck. She easily navigated across the air mattress and settled in. Her skirt billowed around her as Zack settled next to her. "The fireworks should start any minute. Right over there." He pointed to the other side of the river. Just then, a rocket shot into the sky with a loud boom. White sparkles glittered like a giant wishing dandelion before cascading toward the ground. Laura leaned into Zack, his arms circling her shoulders. His warmth sank into her as more fireworks filled the sky. Some shot straight up before exploding, while others twisted and curlicued to their destinations. Some tumbled into red or blue waterfalls, and others illuminated the night sky with thousands of glittery sparks. From this side of the river, the fireworks cast reflections in the water, doubling the magic. An enchanted evening. "I have a confession," Zack said, his voice low. She reached up to play with his loose bow tie, twirling it between her fingers. She could feel his heart kabooming like the fireworks exploding above them. "You can tell me anything," she said, meeting his steady, hopeful gaze. He shifted, bringing them both face to face, his legs twining with hers, one hand splayed across her waist. Sparks sizzled all through her body at his closeness. Her heart danced with excitement, waiting for him to begin, knowing whatever it was would change everything. "The day you showed up with that moving truck, my life went into a tailspin. It was a glaring reminder that the past 8 years were nothing but a broken melody, like I had been living the saddest song in the whole wide world." He lightly fingered a flyaway strand of her hair. "But with you, I'm whole, complete. Like all the missing harmony pieces were found and finally reunited." His fingers trailed down her temple, over her jawline and down her neck. Everywhere he touched, her nerve endings were aflame, crackling along with the fireworks. She fought against closing her eyes and letting the sensations take over. Instead, she focused on the sincerity burning in his hazel eyes, focused on his words, wanting them to sink in so she could remember this moment forever. "I've fallen for you hard and fast, but my heart was always yours. So, I guess I'm trying to say, I love you. Again." "He loves me. 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 Me." Her heart burst in time with a white waterfall. Her hand tightened around the bow tie, holding him still as she leaned her forehead to his. Her heart was ready to be placed in his caring, capable hands. "I love you too." She tipped her face up, capturing his lips as they sealed their confessions with a kiss. Waves of bliss rippled from her heart to the tips of her toes, encompassing her in the most amazing feeling of being completely and utterly loved. When their kiss broke, Zack eased onto his back, taking her with him so she could snuggle up beside him as the fireworks finale began. "Wait a minute." She lifted up on her elbow, looking down at him. "What do you mean, again?" At his confused look, she continued. "You said you were telling me you love me again. When was the first time?" There was that Cheshire Cat grin. "During our movie marathon." She shifted through memories of that night, her eyebrows crinkling. "Oh, no." Her eyes widened. "I thought I dreamed that. Ron was talking to me, and then suddenly you were there saying, 'I love you.' I woke up with it fresh in my mind, but in the kitchen you never said anything, so I was sure it was only a dream." "It was real, although it shocked me when you mumbled, 'I love you back.' I was sure you were dreaming about your childhood cat." She leaned in, dropping a light kiss over his heart. "No cat, just for you." "I should warn you that I'm planning for a forever of movie nights," and mumbled, "I love yous." She sighed, fully relaxing into his embrace, as the sky sparkled above them. Forever sounds absolutely heavenly. We hope you enjoyed this production of Confessions to the Girl Next Door, presented by Wonderstruck Books, written by Danyelle Ferguson, and read for you by Cindy Gunderson. Copyright Danyelle Ferguson, 2023. Binge read the entire Crystal Creek series. Confessions to the Girl Next Door, Crazy for the Sweet Confections Baker, Saving Dr. Weston Blake, A Best Friend's Guide to Love, How to Woo a Billionaire in 10 Days. Enjoy this sneak peek of the next audiobook in the Crystal Creek series, Crazy for the Sweet Confections Baker. Chapter 1. Life as a single chick sucked. Well, not all of it. Rachel loved designing cakes at the upscale bakery she co-owned with her best friend. Kicking butt at local and state cake competitions made work all the sweeter. No, there were lots of great elements about life in general, but the search for the guy was exhausting. Was it really too much for a girl to ask for interesting conversation not centered around sports? A guy who laughed at corny jokes, possibly even himself at times, and a kiss with some zing? Major zing would be most appreciated. She'd had visions of left-handed sparkle in the not-so-distant future with Nico Giambiasi. Instead, she sat at Brisket and Noodles, one of Kansas City's popular barbecue restaurants, decked out in her favorite clingy jeans, an emerald top that contrasted nicely with her deep red hair, and killer heels, trying to absorb the bomb her boyfriend had just dropped. Are you serious? You're married? Rachel pushed her hair back over her shoulder, although she was tempted to wrap it around her fingers and pull hard to see if this conversation was real or just a horrible dream.
It's not what you think, darling.
Nico reached across the table, but she moved her hands to her lap. Really? We've been dating for 3 months. What am I supposed to think? She searched his face for signs of something she must have missed, but all she saw were dark good looks. She leaned back in the seat and placed a hand over her stomach, trying to hold back the bubble of hysterical laughter gathering within. Dimly, she heard him talking, but couldn't focus on the words. How could this be true? Sure, he left for extended trips, often flying back to Italy where the company he worked for was based. But married? Never in 1,000 million years would she have guessed he was spoken for in a very permanent way. Had all the time they spent together really been one big tangled web of lies? There should be a cell phone app that monitors your social calendar and sends a flashing neon text message after 10 dates, with a reminder that it's probably time to apply the one thing the male species ever got right. The Boy Scout motto, be prepared, and locate the nearest emergency exit. Then she heard something that made her sit up straight. Stop. Say that again. She shook her head. She couldn't have possibly heard him right.
I said if it weren't for the kids, I would have left Danita long before I met you.
Your kids? She squeaked. The image of a little boy covered in dust and dirt and a sweet girl holding her baby doll with no daddy to play with popped into her head. Nico was lucky the table wasn't preset with sharp knives. The jerk. She leaned forward and lowered her voice. You make me sick. She pushed back from the table and stood to leave, but he grabbed her arm and pulled her close.
You need to listen, Rachel.
Anger sharpened his features. Her heart pounded against her chest as she attempted to step away, but he pulled her closer still.
Sit down. I'm not finished yet.
She reached for a glass of water, intending to throw it in his face, but he took the goblet from her.
Please. That is so cliché.
Her nails bit into the palm of her hand. Then the next thing she knew, her fist connected with his nose. Pain shot up her forearm all the way to her elbow. Holy mackerel, she had never hit anyone before. But thankfully, her brothers made her learn how to do it properly. Nico gasped and released her, bending over to cover his face. She took the opportunity to snatch her purse and get away, quickly weaving between the tables toward the front of the restaurant. Well, Rachel, she thought, this is what you get for meeting people online. Didn't Mom tell you there were a bunch of loonies out there? But did you listen? Of course not. As she neared the foyer, Nico yanked her around to face him. A trickle of blood ran down from his nose. A wave of queasiness washed over her when he reached up and wiped it with the back of his hand. He looked at the smeared blood, then shoved his hand into his pocket before returning his attention to her.
Where do you think you're going? You came with me and you'll leave with me.
People waiting to be seated stopped talking and stared at the drama unfolding before them. Let go of me, Nico. You're causing a scene, she said quietly. Instead, his hand tightened on her arm, making her wince. What was he doing? He had always been charming and sweet, until tonight. Was it all a masquerade? Excuse me, but I believe the lady asked you to let her go. The deep voice came from over her shoulder. Nico glanced up and his eyes widened, then narrowed. He slowly released her arm. Rachel automatically stepped away, but bumped into a solid chest. She moved to the side and looked up. And up. Beside her stood one of the tallest men she'd ever seen. She was an average girl who could hit 5'8" with the right heels on, but still, her head barely came to the middle of his chest. He turned and blocked Nico from her. Are you okay, miss? He asked in an unexpectedly gentle voice. She forced herself to nod, but couldn't seem to make her vocal cords work. He studied her for a moment, then gave a return nod. When he turned around, she saw Nico's face harden with resentment, and a shiver ran down her spine.
Rachel,
Nico said tightly.
This is enough. I'm taking you home now.
I believe she's changed her mind. You can say goodnight. Her rescuer motioned to the front door. Nico looked as if he might push the issue, but instead turned away and pulled his coat on.
I'll call you tomorrow.
Don't. She couldn't stand the thought of being near him. If she didn't get away from him soon, her roiling stomach would force her to the nearest restroom or trash can.
I'll call you tomorrow,
he repeated, then shoved the door open and stormed out. Married. He's married. Excuse me, the man said, stepping to her side. Perhaps you'd like to come into my office while you wait for a cab? Rachel tightened her grip on her purse, trying unsuccessfully to quiet the jumbled confusion in her head. Yes, thank you. I'd appreciate that. Max, please call a cab and let me know when it arrives. The restaurant host gave a slight nod in acknowledgement. Then she followed the man down a short hallway and into a masculine office. Simple black-framed pictures of hockey players and teams lined the wall behind the desk. He motioned to the black leather couch, sitting in front of a large mahogany desk. Please sit while I get you a drink. She sank into the soft, buttery leather and closed her eyes, concentrating, searching for the calm she needed to make it home before falling apart. She could keep herself together. She would keep herself together. She opened her eyes to find the manager standing before her with a glass of ice water. She'd noticed his height, but didn't realize how big he really was. Medium brown hair fell forward onto his forehead, his shoulders were wide, and everything else was all muscle. The combination of being in the small office and him standing near made her claustrophobic. She thanked him, then took a sip, but didn't relax until he took a few steps back and leaned against the edge of the desk. I'm Graydon Green, he said. And I take it you're Rachel? He extended his hand toward her. Yes, Rachel Marconi. Warmth tingled where his rough palm rubbed against hers and she pulled away. I really appreciate your help, Mr. Green. Please, call me Graydon. Do you need some ice for that? He motioned to her hand. She held it out in front of her. There was some redness around the knuckles and it still hurt a little, but she shook her head. I've never hit anyone before, not even my stupid brothers when they cut the hair off my Barbie dolls. She flexed her hand a few times, then transferred the water glass to it. The iciness felt good as it seeped into her hand. It looks like you did a decent job for your first try. She twisted the glass around, listening to the clink of ice against glass. Calm, she repeated to herself. Find something else to focus on. She looked at the decor. So, who's the hockey fan? His whole body tensed and became unnaturally still before relaxing. The moment passed so fast she wasn't sure if she had really seen it, or if it had been her imagination.
The guys in my family, anytime we all get together, it's the only thing that can be on TV without someone complaining.
He hesitated, then asked,
Do you like hockey?
She shook her head. Not really. But my dad and brothers follow almost everything. Football, golf, soccer, bowling. I think I've interrupted them during a few hockey games. Personally, I think it's too violent. She looked again at all the hockey pictures, sure she had offended a die-hard fan. Well, it's not just hockey. I feel the same way about football.
Says the girl who just punched her boyfriend in the nose,
Graydon said. A small lopsided smile made a dimple appear in one cheek. Rachel snorted. Believe me, he deserved it. He remained silent, looking at her in a way that made her feel like he was weighing her comments. She met his gaze as they contemplated each other. Then she blurted out, What is it with guys and lying? Why do men think it's okay to cheat? Graydon jolted in surprise. He held his hands out as if defending himself from an ambush.
Just because I'm a guy doesn't mean I understand why others make the choices they do.
He lowered his hands to grasp the edge of the desk.
To answer your question, I don't know. Maybe they grew up with dads who cheated or didn't have someone around to teach them the right way to treat a woman.
He shrugged.
I do know there are lots of good guys out there.
If there are, I haven't discovered proof of their existence. He leaned slightly forward.
Is that what tonight was about?
Rachel turned her head away. She would never tell a stranger the truth. But how could she tell her family and best friend that she unwittingly became the other woman, the one wives whisper about and plot revenge against? She gripped the glass of water, pondering how her life had taken this turn. My parents have been married for almost 40 years, she said. These days it seems like a miracle if a couple stays together long enough to celebrate their 10th anniversary. Their eyes met, hers blinking to hold back a wave of emotion while his were contemplative. What happened that people don't love and respect each other through all the bumps anymore? The question sat in the silence of the room, dangling like a dead man at the end of a rope. Rachel's stomach tightened in a knot, creating a combination of queasiness and the urge to laugh at the horrendousness of the situation. She had gone from a startling, relationship-altering bomb being dropped to spewing her innermost gut-wrenching questions about men and relationships to a total stranger. She fidgeted in her seat, desperate to change the subject. Suddenly, it clicked in her mind who he reminded her of. Has anyone ever said you look like that guy from the pacifier? His forehead scrunched in confusion. That should have been her clue to stop, but instead verbal diarrhea took over. You know, the movie about the military guy who ends up babysitting? I'm terrible at remembering celebrities. She rubbed her forehead, trying hard to come up with the name that seemed to be on the edge of her memory. Anything to keep her mind distracted from tonight's disaster. He cleared his throat.
You mean Vin Diesel?
Her head snapped up. That's it.
You think I look like Vin Diesel?
Yes. Well, other than you actually have hair, and I guess he's on the short side, and you're rather tall. She tilted her head, not able to stop the rambling. But your faces are similar, and you're both freakishly muscular. Heat flooded her cheeks. His lips were thin and his eyes crinkled at the corners while mirth danced in the brown depths. I'm sorry. I tend to put my foot in my mouth, or let it out as the case may be, but... She didn't even finish the sentence before he began to laugh. Great. Where was the duct tape when you needed it? A light knock caught her attention. She turned to see the restaurant host standing at the door.
Your cab has arrived, miss.
Escape. The emergency exit she so desperately needed finally appeared. She gathered her things, then stood and bumped into Graydon. I'm sorry, she mumbled, hurrying out of the room.
Wait.
He followed her down the hall. She almost made it to the front entrance without speaking to him again.
Here, let me get the door for you. He reached around and grabbed the handle. Sure, anything to get me out of here faster. She brushed past him to the cab waiting at the curb, but paused when she thought she saw Nico's car parked at the corner. Has he been waiting for me all this time? She squinted to see if it really was him, but the car was parked in a poorly lit area of the street. The evening's darkness made it difficult to tell if someone sat inside or not. Once more, Graydon materialized, this time to open the cab door. She wanted to slide in and escape. Instead, she turned toward him one last time. His expression was calm and warm. Chocolate. His eyes reminded her of melted chocolate just before mixing it into ganache. She blinked, then refocused. For a brief moment, gratitude pushed her desperation and anger aside. Thank you for helping me earlier. She started to move, but he took her hand in a reassuring manner and helped her into the cab, then briefly squeezed it before he stepped back. I hope you come back soon, Rachel Marconi. He closed the door and waved the driver on. She turned in her seat. Graydon stood at the curb, hands in his pockets, watching her ride away. She faced forward and sighed. The night flashed through her mind like a bad movie rerun. Well, one thing's for certain. I'm an idiot. She wiped at the tears falling down her cheeks, pulled her cell out of her purse, and hit speed dial. But at least I'm an idiot who has Ben & Jerry's and a best friend to share it with.
We hope you enjoyed this sample of Crazy for the Sweet Confections Baker. Find out what happens next with Rachel and Graydon by downloading their story from your favorite audiobook vendor. Thank you for listening.